Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a job so cursed, so relentlessly awful, that you'll actually be grateful for your 9 to 5 tomorrow. Welcome to your miserable life as King Henry VIII's personal doctor. This isn't some modern clinic with white walls and gentle lighting. No, this is Tudor England, a place where medicine often involves bloodletting, ground-up pearls, and prayers that no one mistakes you for a sorcerer. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go on, I'll wait. And while you're at it, drop your city and the current time down in the comments. I always love seeing where and when you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your name is John, a reasonably educated man by Tudor standards. You've studied at the University of Cambridge, then spent a few years travelling through France and Italy, picking up the latest ideas in anatomy and humoral theory. That's 4 humours, in case you forgot. Blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. If any of those get out of whack, you're doomed, or at least due for a nice round of leeches. You're proud of your knowledge, maybe even a bit cocky. You've read Galen and Hippocrates in Latin. You wear a smart robe, you think you're ready for anything. You're absolutely not. It begins with a letter, sealed with wax and marked with the royal crest. The king has requested your services. Not requested exactly, summoned. You don't say no to that. You pack your supplies, herbs, scalpels, a small brass enema syringe, and climb into a carriage bound for Whitehall Palace. The road is muddy, the smell of horse dung and river rot hanging thick in the air. You arrive late afternoon, exhausted and already regretting every life decision that led you here. The palace is enormous, glittering with stained glass and dripping with the sweat of hundreds of servants. But grandeur aside, it's still Tudor England. There's no plumbing, no ventilation, and more lice than should ever exist in one place. You're escorted through marble halls and velvet-draped rooms until you're brought before your patient. And there he is, King Henry VIII, a mountain of a man, already broad and thick by his mid-30s, with sharp blue eyes and a glare that could peel paint. His beard is ginger, his doublet strained at every seam. He sits on an ornate chair, leg extended, and you smell him before you really see him, a sour, rotting scent, like meat left out in the sun. Your nostrils burn, your stomach wobbles. "You're the doctor then," he says, not a question, more of a threat. You bow low, your robe sweeps the floor. "Your Majesty." "Fix this," he barks, pointing to his leg. You hesitate. The layers are peeled back. There it is, your first encounter with the leg. A fist-sized ulcer, leaking a viscous yellow-green ooze. The skin around it is dark, almost black. Bits of old linen dressing stick to the wound like half-melted wax. It smells like spoiled milk and raw sewage. You don't flinch, at least not outwardly, but internally you're screaming. Historical fact, Henry VIII suffered from chronic leg ulcers for much of his adult life, especially after a jousting injury that likely damaged the bone and circulation in his lower limb. The wound never healed, and repeated infections made things worse. Some scholars now believe he may have had type 2 diabetes, worsening the condition. Others suggest osteomyelitis, bone infection, or even a rare genetic condition like McLeod syndrome. But the truth? We're still debating. Fringe fact? Some records say the wound emitted such a foul odour that courtiers had to hold scented handkerchiefs just to stay in the room. One ambassador from France allegedly gagged during an audience. You, unfortunately, have no such luxury. You're front and centre, you kneel. You try not to breathe through your nose. You begin cleaning the leg with vinegar-soaked linen, murmuring soothing nothings. The king winces, then swears, then laughs. "Not bad," he says, "for a butcher." High praise. After that, things move fast. You're installed in the palace, given chambers near the royal apartments. They're damp and probably haunted, but still a step up from your last flat over a candlemaker's shop. Your duties? You're now in charge of the king's health, which basically means you're blamed when he's in pain and ignored when he's not. You rise before dawn to check his leg, rewrap the bandage, and suggest dietary changes that he immediately ignores. "More roast swan," he demands, "with sugar." You nod. You also have to keep records, how the leg looks, how the king feels, his pulse, his urine colour, even the moon phase. Yes, astrology is a huge part of your medical routine. If the moon's in Capricorn and the king sneezes, that could mean plague, or indigestion, or treason. You're not always sure. 1 week in and you're exhausted. 2 weeks in and your nerves are shot. By the end of the month, you flinch every time a servant knocks, because sometimes they're just bringing food, and sometimes they're fetching you because the king feels a twinge and wants you to drain his leg pus at midnight. You wonder privately what happens if you fail. You've seen the tower, you've seen the axe, so you smile, you nod. You open your leather bag of horrors, pull out a curved silver probe and whisper, "This won't hurt a bit." It always does. By now, you've learned something critical. The king's leg isn't just an injury, it's a mood. It decides how your day will go, whether heads will roll, and whether you'll be sleeping in your bed or on the cold stone floor of the royal infirmary. And today the leg is angry. You're summoned before sunrise by a servant who looks like he'd rather be thrown in the Thames than deliver this message. His Majesty is in discomfort, the man says, avoiding your eyes. That's code, you know it. You throw on your robe, splash some rosewater on your face and grab your instruments, already dreading what you're about to see. The hallway is silent, except for the soft clatter of your own steps. You pass by tapestries depicting noble battles and glorious hunts, though right now you feel more like prey than predator. When you reach the king's chamber, the guards open the heavy oak door without a word. The smell hits you like a physical blow, worse than usual. Sour, infected, almost metallic. You clench your jaw. Henry is sitting up in bed, pale and scowling. His leg is uncovered and already glistening with fluids that should never be outside a human body. You kneel beside it. Your tools, bone scraper, silver syringe, clean linens, are laid out beside you like a sacrificial altar. You begin with warm vinegar and cloth, but he hisses and swats your hand away. "Cut it open," he snaps. "Drain it." You blink. "Your Majesty, if I may..." He growls, not figuratively, literally, like a bear. You've seen him angry before, but this is different. You nod quickly, pull your knife from its sheath and make the incision. The wound erupts, yes, erupts, sending a foul mixture of blood, pus, and half-clotted tissue down your forearm. It steams in the cold morning air. Henry groans in relief. You try not to breathe. Somewhere in the back of your mind, a voice whispers, "I trained for this." Historical fact. Royal doctors of the Tudor era had to treat chronic wounds with very limited tools. Lancing boils and ulcers was common, though antisepsis wouldn't be discovered for another 3 centuries. Infections often worsened after treatment, but at the time, draining bad humours was considered curative. You finish the procedure, rewrap the leg, and stand to wash your hands in a basin of wine. Yes, wine. It's your only disinfectant, and even that's more for show than anything. Henry grunts. "Better," he mutters. "You'll live another day." You give a stiff bow. "Thank you, sire." And just like that, you're dismissed. You leave the room in silence, your shoes squishing slightly from the blood-soaked floor. You tell yourself it's fine. You've seen worse. You're lying to yourself, obviously. You barely make it down the hallway before you slump against the wall, heart pounding. You want to vomit. You want to run. But you also want to keep your head, which means you'll be back tomorrow morning, kneeling before the leg once more. Later that day, you're called to a private audience with Lady Rochford, one of the Queen's ladies in waiting. She looks you over with a wrinkled nose. "You're the leg doctor," she says. "Royal physician," you reply through gritted teeth. "Yes, well, His Majesty was most foul this morning. I do hope you haven't allowed his condition to worsen." You smile, a slow, fake smile. "He bled beautifully today." She laughs, confused. "Good." You return to your quarters to find a package waiting, a fresh batch of leeches. You sigh. Your assistant, a wiry boy with ears too large for his head, helps you unpack them. They wiggle and writhe, slick and glistening. In court they're seen as miracle workers. You know better. Sometimes they help, sometimes they just leave a rash. Quirky fact, Tudor-era physicians believed leeches could balance the humours by removing excess blood. Some noble households kept entire jars of the little beasts, fed on raw meat until they were needed. There were even leech keepers employed in large estates. You try to unwind that night, reading by candlelight, but the flickering flame throws long, twitching shadows on the wall. Your thoughts wander. What if the infection spreads? What if he loses the leg? What if he dies? And worse, what if you are blamed? You've seen how Henry deals with traitors. You've smelled the smoke from the execution fires, seen heads piked along London Bridge. You know that medicine and politics are deeply, disgustingly entwined here. If the king gets worse, the queen might whisper that you're unskilled, or worse, disloyal. And once that idea spreads, you'll be lucky if you're just banished. Some nights you find yourself talking to the leeches, just little comments. You're lucky, you mutter. At least no one expects you to cure the king. It's either that or lose your mind. There's a debate, even now, about whether any of Henry's doctors ever dared speak the truth. That maybe the leg wasn't curable, that perhaps the king's life was slowly draining through a festering hole in his shin. But no written records admit to it. No diaries say, "We knew he was dying." Just polite lies, gilded nonsense, and endless recipes for ointments that never worked. The next morning you're summoned again. Of course you are. You step into the room with practiced calm. The air is stale, but at least the bleeding has stopped. He's sitting up, sipping wine. He glances at you. "It's still sore." You nod. "Shall we try the leeches, Your Majesty?" He grins. "Let's." You kneel, you open the jar, and gently, lovingly, like a madman with no other options, you press one onto his swollen calf. It sticks, begins to suck. The king chuckles. Thirsty little beast. You smile politely. Internally, screaming again. You wake before dawn again, as always, to the sour smell of vinegar and old herbs, the sting of candle smoke in your eyes, and the gentle squelch of moist linen under your feet. This is your life now. One long blur of wounds, pus, and passive-aggressive nobles. Today you reach for your medical kit with something approaching resignation. Not despair. No, that came and went. Now it's more like weary routine. You know what's waiting. You smell what's waiting. The usual procession begins. Cold water on your face, a splash of rosemary tonic, and your morning mutterings to the jars of ointment. Don't let him bleed to death today, so you say to the pot of myrrh salve. Don't let the leech explode again, you whisper to the basin. You wrap yourself in your physician's robe, trim the fraying hem for dignity, and prepare for your rounds. Because it's not just the king. Oh no! Being his personal doctor means you also see to the rest of the royal household. And that household is massive. Courtiers, servants, ladies-in-waiting, musicians, and half-drunk noblemen, who all seem to have the same symptoms: boils, constipation, and a deep suspicion that they're being poisoned. First up, Lord Stanley, who believes he has melancholia of the liver. You diagnose it as too much wine and not enough daylight, but that won't do. So you prescribe him crushed pearl in honey and a series of mustard plasters. Sounds impressive. He seems satisfied. He'll be back next week complaining of liver heat or some other nonsense. Then Lady Elizabeth, who insists she's caught royal exhaustion from staying up too late gossiping. You apply rose oil to her temples and readjust her posture with a linen corset binding. She thanks you like you've cured the plague. Historical fact. Tudor medicine was based almost entirely on balancing the four humours, and physicians were expected to treat both physical and emotional complaints through bizarre and often contradictory methods: purging, sweating, bleeding, and the use of cooling or warming foods depending on one's mood or season. And then, finally, the king. You arrive in his chamber to find him dressed, but sulking, slumped in a gilded chair with a turkey leg in one hand and a sour scowl on his face. "It smells like death in here," he growls. "That's just your leg, Your Majesty," you reply before catching yourself. His eyes flick toward you. You freeze. Did you say that out loud? A beat passes. Then he snorts, laughs even. "Ha! A bold tongue. I like that." You smile cautiously. You may live another day. You kneel beside him and begin the familiar routine. Remove the bandages, clean the wound with rose vinegar, scrape away the necrotic tissue with a small silver spoon you try not to think of as a spoon. The ulcer has widened. You apply a fresh poultice made from comfrey and goose fat. It's useless, but it smells nice. You suggest less red meat and more vegetables. He waves you off. "Wine is fruit," he says. "Fruit is health." "Very wise, Your Majesty." You nod along, of course, you always do. That's part of the job. Pretending that Henry VIII is a medical authority simply because he says so. He's read half of one Galenic text, and now believes he knows better than anyone in England. He even has his own opinions on surgical technique, which is terrifying. Quirky fact, King Henry VIII kept a personal apothecary and was known to take a strong interest in medicine, even writing his own herbal recipes and offering treatment advice to courtiers. Some of his concoctions included dried rose petals, mint, and ground pearls, luxurious but largely useless. Sometimes he wants bleeding, sometimes he wants nothing. Sometimes he wants you to just sit there while he complains about his leg, the Queen, Parliament, or his bowels. Today, it's his bowels. I haven't had a movement in 2 days, he grunts. You nod gravely. A tragedy, sire. He eyes you. What would you recommend? You pause. The truth. He needs less meat, more water, and a walk. The answer you give? A mild purgative of rhubarb, milk of almonds, and powdered antimony. Excellent, he says. Make it taste like cherries. Of course, you mix the potion that afternoon in your quarters, crushing dried rhubarb root and sifting powdered minerals into a viscous brown sludge. You stir it with a carved bone rod and add cherry syrup for taste, like the king asked. You take a cautious sniff. Smells like a crime. You bring it to him on a silver tray and watch as he downs it in 3 gulps. Strong, he says, face pinching, but effective. You smile. Expect results shortly, sire. And you mean shortly. Later, as you clean yourself up and pray no one calls for you until morning, you reflect on just how absurd your life has become. You're a Cambridge-educated man, once a proud scholar, now reduced to mixing fruited-flavoured diarrhea potions for a bloated monarch who thinks he's smarter than you. You whisper this fact to the Leeches, who at least don't talk back. There's debate among scholars about whether Henry's leg was the cause or the result of his famous temper. Some believe chronic pain made him cruel. Others argue he was already leaning tyrannical, and the pain just stripped away the last of his restraint. You? You're inclined to think it's both. You've seen that rage up close. Sometimes it's explosive, other times it simmers, but it's always there, like the wound, festering just below the surface. Tonight, you fall asleep at your writing desk, face pressed against a sheaf of parchment detailing the king's latest bowel habits. You dream of leeches with royal titles, arguing over whose blood is more noble. When you wake, it's to a new message scrawled in urgent ink. His Majesty complains of pressure behind the eye. Of course he does. You drag yourself out of bed, mouth dry, lower back howling, an eye twitching from the dozen half-sleepless nights you've stacked in a row. The message about pressure behind the eye still sits on your nightstand, mocking you. Pressure behind the eye could mean anything or nothing. Maybe the king sneezed and panicked. Maybe he read too much by candlelight. Or maybe, just maybe, this is the day you finally fail and end up swinging from a rope while a crowd cheers. You throw on your robe with all the enthusiasm of a condemned man dressing for his walk to the gallows. You arrive at the royal bedchamber just past sunrise. The air is heavy with the scent of burning sage, likely an attempt to chase off corrupt air. Henry is propped up in bed with silk pillows behind him, one hand cradling his forehead like a dramatic actor midway through a soliloquy. It feels like someone's drilling into my skull, he moans. Here! He points to his right temple with a stubby finger, face glistening with sweat. Fix it! You nod, already mentally flipping through your options. The pressure could be caused by inflammation, sinus congestion, stress, or one of 100 other conditions none of your textbooks actually know how to treat. The Tudor solution? Bleed it, blister it, or purge it. You choose the middle path. Your Majesty, I suggest a cupping treatment behind the ear, followed by a small blistering plaster. He grunts. That's consent enough. Historical fact, blistering was a common treatment for headaches, fevers, and many other ailments. Physicians believed drawing fluid to the surface of the skin would pull disease or excess humours out with it. It worked, in the sense that it distracted people from their original pain by giving them a new one. You heat your brass cupping vessels over a candle flame. The chamber is dim, and the flickering light turns Henry's face into a gargoyle's, twisted with pain and fury. You apply the cups to the side of his head, a pop and hiss later, and the vessels cling to his skin, pulling it upward into tight red domes. He groans, mutters, swears. You count the seconds. Then comes the blistering agent, a paste of Spanish fly ground into goose fat. It burns like sin. Henry flinches hard as you apply it, eyes bulging, fists clenched. You don't breathe, not until he relaxes, just slightly, and mutters, "Better." You wrap the spot in linen and make yourself scarce. That afternoon you hear rumours swirling through the halls like smoke. Whispers that the king might be possessed, that he's going blind, that he dreams of wolves, that he's cursed. People love a cursed king. You dismiss it, of course, but court gossip spreads faster than plague, and it always trickles down to you. Because if the king is sick, someone must be blamed, And who better than the man holding the leeches? Later, you're called to a meeting with Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who's always hovering around like a crow dressed in velvet. The king's suffering must be seen as a test, he says, sipping wine too early in the day. A divine burden. You nod, non-committal. You've heard this angle before. Indeed, Archbishop. But others, he continues, lowering his voice, believe it may be unnatural, perhaps induced. There it is, the poison theory. Again, you maintain a blank expression. I prepare all his tonics myself. He leans in. Then I suggest you continue to do so and nothing else. No unnecessary opinions, no questionable suggestions. You bow. Of course. Quirky fact. Poison paranoia ran rampant in royal courts. Many kings, including Henry VIII, were obsessed with the idea of being slowly poisoned by rivals. Food tasters were employed, and royal physicians were often required to sip the king's medicines in front of him. You return to your quarters and dump out your entire cabinet of dried herbs. You inspect every root, leaf and resin for signs of tampering. You seal your medicine chest with wax. You sleep with one eye open, your surgical knife tucked under your pillow. In the days that follow, the king's headaches come and go, sometimes mild, sometimes intense enough that he screams loud enough to startle the hounds in the courtyard. You try everything, bloodletting from the temple, mustard foot baths, even a foul-smelling paste made from crushed earthworms and sage. Yes, worms, don't ask. One evening, as you wrap his foot in linen soaked with lavender and hope, he turns to you and says, I know they talk about me. You freeze. Sire? The lords, my council, the women. He looks at you with something that's not quite anger, not quite trust. They say I'm losing my mind. You choose your words carefully. People fear what they don't understand, Your Majesty, and they misunderstand strength. He studies you silent, then. You're not as stupid as you look. Praise? Thank you, sire. There's debate among modern scholars as to whether Henry's mental state declined due to injury or illness. Some suggest traumatic brain injury from his famous jousting accident in 1536, which knocked him unconscious for 2 hours. Others propose untreated syphilis or diabetes. But as always with Tudor history, hard evidence is scarce. You, on the other hand, don't have the luxury of theories. You have a man screaming at you to drain the fire from his skull. One night the pressure becomes unbearable. He orders you to stay at his bedside. You sit on a stool for hours while he moans and thrashes, muttering names of long-dead wives, enemies, and strangely animals. The wolf has eyes, he says, red eyes, in the garden. You start to wonder if he believes he's cursed now. You gently place a cool cloth on his brow. He doesn't push your hand away. Small victories. At dawn, the pain eases. He sleeps. You do not. You return to your chambers, collapse into a chair, and stare at the ceiling. Your body aches. Your mind races. And for a fleeting moment, you consider quitting. Walking away, leaving the palace and its cursed ulcers and midnight nosebleeds behind. But where would you go? Who else would hire the man responsible for managing the King of England's pus? You sigh, stand, pick up your blood-smeared robe, and begin preparing the cherry-flavoured laxative for tomorrow. You wake to pounding, not in your head, though that wouldn't be a surprise, but on your chamber door. It's not even dawn. You shuffle to it, bleary-eyed, yank it open, and find a nervous page boy standing there, clutching a scroll. His Majesty's stars are in conflict, the boy blurts out before thrusting the scroll into your chest like it might explode. Then he runs. You close the door slowly. You're not even sure what that means yet, but it already sounds like nonsense. You unroll the parchment. It's from the Royal Astrologer, a man named Melrose, who wears velvet robes with little embroidered constellations and smells like nutmeg and desperation. He's declared that the king's ailments may be astrally rooted, something about Mars squaring Saturn and Venus turning retrograde, which apparently explains the king's throbbing leg, foul temper, and that rash he's now blaming on your ointments. You rub your face. This is the part of the job that really tests your patience. Astrology in Tudor medicine isn't a fringe belief, it's law. You're expected to consult planetary positions before attempting any treatment. You even have an astrological calendar in your quarters, with little sun and moon faces doodled next to each date. Today, according to Melrose, is astrologically unfavourable for applying leeches or administering any purgatives, which is awkward because that's exactly what you were planning to do. You trudge through the hallway toward the Royal Solar, where Henry is having his gentle breakfast, which in king terms means 6 sausages, half a duck, 3 eggs drowned in cream, and a tankard of spiced wine. You arrive just as he's polishing off the last bite. He looks up, mouth gleaming with grease, and gestures to a nearby chair. "Explain this astrology nonsense," he growls. "That star plucker Melrose says I've got Venus in my kidneys. You choose your words with caution." "Well, Your Majesty, astrology teaches us that celestial alignments influence bodily functions. Mars rules the blood, Saturn governs the bones, and spleen Venus, the, softer tissues. So Venus is making my leg rot." You hesitate. "In a manner of speaking," he grunts. "Then get her out of me." Historical fact. Medical astrology, or iatromathematics, was considered a legitimate part of medicine in the 16th century. Physicians often wouldn't begin surgeries, bleedings, or even apply poultices unless the planets were deemed favourable. Charts were cast for a patient's birth and the moment of illness to determine humoral imbalances and proper timing for interventions. You've long since memorised your astrological phrases. You fall back on them like a good court physician. It may be best to wait until the moon exits Scorpio, Your Majesty. Then your humours will be more receptive to rebalancing. "Bah," he says. "The moon doesn't rule me. I rule the moon." "Yes, Your Majesty, but you don't dare contradict the astrologer either. Melrose has the Queen's ear, and the Queen, whichever one it is this week, is increasingly opinionated about her husband's health. Last week she sent you a letter suggesting that the King's rash might be caused by an imbalance between his masculine energies and the position of Jupiter. You burned the letter after reading it. You spend the rest of the day trying to treat Henry without looking like you're treating him. You pretend to cleanse his aura by waving burning herbs around him. You massage his temples with rose oil aligned to the lunar cycle. You prescribe boiled nettles because they counteract Mars. Really, you're just hoping the anti-inflammatory properties kick in before someone declares the king's soul has been compromised by Saturn. Quirky fact. In Tudor times, people who believed certain herbs and minerals were aligned with specific planets. For example, rosemary was associated with the sun, while nettles belonged to Mars. Treatments weren't just chosen for physical symptoms, they had to match the cosmic diagnosis as well. By mid-afternoon, you find yourself cornered by Dr. Melrose himself in the hallway. He smells stronger than usual, and his pupils are the size of farthings. "You're interfering," he hisses, leaning far too close. "The king's energies are delicate. Your poultices are confusing his planetary rhythm." You smile tightly, and your powdered unicorn horn is confusing mine. He gasps like you just slapped his mother. You walk away before he can report you to the Queen, or worse, to Cromwell. Thomas Cromwell, Henry's right hand and the scariest man alive, has little patience for mystical nonsense, but he also has little patience for failure. If Melrose claims your treatments are astrologically misaligned and the king worsens, guess who'll be blamed? Hint, it's not the guy wearing a hat covered in star charts. That night you visit the palace library, pulling down ancient tomes on star-guided medicine. You copy out planetary charts, matching Mars to bloodletting days and Venus to urine analysis. You even sketch out a star map for the king's next bowel movement, just in case someone asks. You hate yourself a little, but not as much as you fear Cromwell. There's debate among historians about how seriously royal physicians really took astrology, or if they just went along with it to avoid losing favour. Some letters suggest that physicians rolled their eyes in private, but played the game in public. You are definitely playing the game. The following morning, Henry is in a decent mood. Venus has apparently shifted, or maybe his leg just stopped screaming. You don't care. You kneel, inspect the wound, and murmur, "The stars smile on you today, sire." He laughs. "They'd better." You gently apply a new ointment, your own blend of poppy seed oil, willow bark, and a few drops of turpentine wrapped in linen soaked in sage. It's risky, unapproved, and definitely not aligned with any constellations, but for the first time in weeks, the swelling seems reduced. That night you update your notes. Blister easing, no new pus, Saturn probably had nothing to do with it. You don't burn that one. You're starting to understand something deeply unsettling about your profession. No one around you, not the astrologer, not the apothecaries, not even the other physicians, actually knows what they're doing. They're guessing. You're all guessing. But you You have to pretend you're certain, because you're the one standing next to a very powerful man with a festering leg, a short fuse, and a habit of sending people to the tower for making his gout flare up. Today's drama begins with a noise, a loud, wet, echoing pop, followed by shouting. You're halfway through an unappetizing breakfast of stale bread and boiled turnips when a footman arrives, panting. His Majesty's sore has erupted, he says between gasps. It got on a tapestry. So you sigh, wipe your mouth and grab your bag. When you enter the royal chamber, there's a moment, just a moment, when you consider backing right back out. The air is heavy with the smell of iron and rot. The king is red-faced and livid, sitting bare-legged while a panicked servant dabs at the floor with a lace-edged napkin. The tapestry in question, a gorgeous piece depicting the siege of Troy, now features an unfortunate new addition. A long, dark stain seeping from Paris's foot straight into the breastplate of Hector. It burst, Henry growls as you kneel beside him. Just burst, like a boil. Yes, sire, you say, examining the angry, weeping wound. The ulcer's grown deeper, now burrowing into muscle. Pus leaks in thick, yellow rivulets. That's not uncommon with this condition. He narrows his eyes. This is your fault. You said the stars were favourable. I did, you say, already reaching for a clean cloth. I also said not to dance. I was celebrating. Of course he was. Historical fact. Henry's leg ulcers worsened significantly in the 1530s, likely exacerbated by obesity, poor circulation, and a previous deep injury from jousting. These sores sometimes burst due to infection build-up, releasing pus and dead tissue. Medical understanding of chronic wounds was almost non-existent at the time, and doctors often treated such flare-ups with cauterization or herbal compresses, neither especially effective. You get to work. First, you flush the wound with warm wine and a handful of sage leaves. The king growls but doesn't stop you. Then comes the real fun. Packing the ulcer with strips of linen soaked in a stinging paste of honey, powdered myrrh and egg white. The mixture sticks like glue and smells like regret. You wrap it in 3 layers of clean linen and secure it with a wide leather band. The king grunts. Will I lose the leg? He asks. You pause, that question again. The one he asks when the pain gets too loud. No, your majesty, you lie. And maybe it's not a complete lie, not yet, but the infection is deepening. You can smell it, feel the heat radiating through the linen, and if it hits the bone, you decide not to finish that thought. Quirky fact, some royal physicians tried using raw meat to draw out infection, especially liver or beef soaked in vinegar. Others believed a wound that stank was actually healing, since it was venting bad air. This meant infected ulcers were sometimes encouraged to stay open and ooze continuously. Once you've wrapped the leg, you back away and breathe. Finally. The king sips wine. That tapestry costs more than your house, he mutters. I can mend it, you say, instantly regretting it. He barks a laugh. With what, blood? Egg yolk and alum, actually. He squints at you. Is that another cure? You shrug. Depends where you apply it. That earns a chuckle, which earns you another day with your head attached. Still, the rest of the court is talking. You can feel it. Rumours flutter through the corridors like bats. The king's leg is rotting. The leg bled on the French ambassador. The leg is cursed. Some whisper about amputation. Others suggest poisoning. One courtier asked you, quite seriously, if the king was turning into a werewolf. You laughed. He did not. That evening you attend a dinner where nobles sit beneath gilded ceilings, chewing roasted swan and pretending they're not afraid. You're seated near the back next to Lady Catherine Brooke, who leans close and whispers, "You know he's dying, don't you?" You don't answer. She smiles, sips her wine and says, "We all are, of course, but he's going first." You leave early. There's a scholarly debate about whether Henry was ever in true danger of sepsis from his leg. Some believe the wound was superficial enough to avoid full systemic infection, while others argue that recurring fever and swelling suggest multiple near misses with death. Either way, you don't have the luxury of long-term analysis. You're too busy stitching gauze and pretending honey is magical. Back in your quarters, you write notes. Tissue grey at margins, fever rising, appetite unchanged, mood volcanic. Then you draw a rough sketch of the ulcer's shape, which for some reason now resembles the county of Kent. You make a note, watch for spreading. You also underline Kent twice, just in case that becomes important. The next morning, Henry's mood has improved slightly. He's had a good movement, which, as you know by now, can reset his entire personality. He allows you to inspect the leg without swearing. You peel back the bandage, no new swelling, no more rupture, no obvious necrosis. It's stable, for now. "You've earned your bread today," he mutters, watching you work. You nod. "It's an honour to serve." You don't say, especially when my patient isn't exploding on priceless artwork. That night you collapse into bed and dream of a leg chasing you down a corridor screaming your name. You wake up sweating, swearing, and reach instinctively for your bandage kit, just in case. Your days begin before the sun now, slipping through darkened halls lit only by sputtering torches and the distant mumble of half-awake servants. The palace, even in its early silence, never feels peaceful. It's too large, too filled with secrets. The walls creak like they remember screams, and though the draught down the corridor toward the king's chambers carries a smell you've come to recognise instantly. Sweat, damp linen, and the quiet rot of old blood, and that means it's time, again, for the royal leg check. You stop briefly at your quarters to collect your instruments. They're always laid out in the same order: silver scalpel, spoon probe, linen strips, salves, bandages, herbal powder, a small bottle of wine, and a freshly washed rag to bite down on. His, not yours. You've learned not to forget the rag. If you do, you'll get screaming. Or worse, he'll bite his own tongue and you will be blamed. A servant greets you with a quick nod outside the king's chamber. You're not the only one afraid to speak this early. The guard opens the door. You step inside. Henry is awake. You were hoping he'd be asleep, at least long enough to prepare your tools by the hearth and warm the wine wash. But no, he's already sitting upright, bare-legged and brooding, scowling as he watches the fire flicker like it owes him money. "Doctor," he says, his voice still thick with sleep but already menacing. "Your Majesty," you reply, bowing quickly. "It's aching this morning, and hot, hotter than usual." You nod, stepping close to the edge of the bed and crouching to inspect the leg. The bandage has gone stiff overnight. You begin peeling it back. Each layer comes off with a faint tearing sound, dried pus acting like glue. The smell kicks you square in the nose. He notices your flinch. "Still not used to it," he sneers. You smile grimly. "Only just learning to appreciate it, sire." He barks a laugh, harsh but real. That buys you a few seconds of goodwill. Once the dressing is off, you examine the wound. It's swollen again, pink at the edges, but not blackening. That's a relief. You clean it gently with warm wine and rosemary oil, dabbing away sludge with a bit of clean linen. Henry grips the arm of his chair, jaw tight. You know better than to speak while he's in pain. You work fast, efficient, practiced. You've done this every morning for weeks. Historical fact. The king's ulcerated leg required constant care, often twice a day, cleaning, draining and redressing. It was believed at the time that opening the wound to drain bad humours would allow healing, but the procedures likely aggravated the injury and worsened the infection. After you finish wrapping the fresh bandage, he sighs and leans back. "Better," he mutters. "Still stings like hell." You nod. "A sting is life, sire. We always prefer a sting to silence." He grins faintly. "You're learning." You pour a small dose of rosewater and offer it to him. He swirls it in his mouth and spits it into the fire. That's his version of brushing his teeth. After that, you begin the rest of your dreaded routine, your morning circuit of courtly hypochondriacs and half-convinced nobles. But the king's leg is always first. Always! You once fantasized about being a learned man of science. You pictured rooms filled with books and ink, bright halls of reason, maybe even foreign travel to learn from Italian anatomists. Instead, you clean a royal leg twice a day and get shouted at for not predicting the weather with goat intestines. And then, mid-morning, your least favourite part of the day arrives. The royal morning public audience. Henry insists on making appearances, even when limping and leaning on a cane. He sees it as a show of strength. You see it as slow-motion disaster. His mood, you've learned, is tied directly to how well his leg tolerates the walk from his chamber to the audience hall. Today it does not tolerate much. As he rises, you can already tell it's going to be bad. He winces, grips your arm harder than usual and mutters, "Damn thing feels like it's filled with fire." You offer a sympathetic hum and try not to grimace when he uses you as a crutch. The audience chamber doors swing open. The courtiers straighten. They all bow in unison. A dozen murmured, "Your Majesties." You notice more than a few concerned glances flicking to the leg. Halfway down the hall, he stops. He's sweating now. Pale. You whisper, "Would you like me to summon a chair?" "No." You nod and don't move. He continues, limping heavily, jaw clenched, muscles shaking beneath velvet and fur. It's a wretched procession, but he makes it to the throne. He collapses onto it like a sack of flour and gestures for everyone to continue as if nothing happened. No one dares mention what they just saw. That's the rule at court. Never acknowledge weakness. Quirky fact, Tudor etiquette dictated extreme reverence toward the monarch, and displaying signs of illness, especially something as grotesque as a rotting leg, was considered a serious political vulnerability. Some courtiers even pretended not to see the king limping or sweating lest they be accused of disloyalty or unmanly observation. Once the court disperses, you help Henry back to his chambers. The walk back is worse. He leans on you so heavily your ribs ache. At one point he mutters, "If I die, it will be in front of all those cowards." You say nothing. You just walk slower. Back in his chambers, he falls into a chair, groaning. You check the dressing. The linen's darkened with fresh blood. "You reopen the sore," you say gently. "I walked like a king," he snaps. And there it is. That pride. That furious feral ego that refuses to admit pain. You nod. "Yes, sire. Like a king." You remove the bandage and begin again. A new layer of honey and crushed willow bark. A new wrap. And another quiet promise to yourself that you'll get through today without vomiting. There's scholarly debate about whether Henry's determination to appear strong in court despite his failing health was a form of denial or a calculated political manoeuvre. You've seen it up close. It's both. He needs to be feared. Even if his own body is revolting against him, he'll drag it to the throne and dare it to stop him. That night you sit by the hearth staring into the fire. You haven't slept in a bed properly in 3 days. Your back hurts. Your hands smell like rotting flesh even after 3 washes. And all you can think about is tomorrow's walk to the throne room, because you'll have to do this all over again. And the king, he'll expect miracles. This morning you're jolted awake not by a polite knock, but by shouting, loud, panicked shouting. And not the regular servant scolded for spilling gravy kind of shouting either. It's frantic, echoing down the stone halls with the unmistakable energy of disaster. You roll out of bed so quickly you forget to grab your robe. No matter. The king is screaming, and when Henry screams, the entire palace stops breathing. You sprint down the corridor, bare feet slapping against the cold flagstones. You shove past a pair of startled footmen and burst into the royal chambers, heart already braced for a leg rupture, a collapsed lung, or an unfortunate servant pinned beneath a tipped royal breakfast table. Instead, you find Henry half-dressed, sweat-drenched, and sprawled on the floor. The scene is chaos. One of the physician's apprentices is holding a half-unwrapped bandage. Another is standing frozen with a vial of spirits clutched to his chest like a relic. The king is gasping, his face red, veins bulging. His eyes flick toward you like a hound spotting prey. "Fix it!" he bellows. "Fix it now!" You don't even ask what happened. You drop to your knees and push the others aside. The ulcer is pulsing, yes, pulsing, and the skin around it is darker than you've ever seen. It's hot to the touch, the pus is thicker, tinged with a disturbing green-grey colour. And the smell? Unholy. Like rot in a cellar. The kind of smell that clings to your soul. He's gone septic. You don't need a textbook to know it. You order wine, lots of it, boiled. You begin flushing the wound, scrubbing it, cutting away the edges with a curved blade while the king howls and curses in Latin. You shout at the apprentices to hold him down. Someone screams, possibly you. At one point he tries to punch the wall but misses and nearly breaks a thumb. Blood flows freely now, mixing with the infection. You're not even sure what's wound and what's royal at this point. Historical fact, in 1536, King Henry VIII suffered a catastrophic jousting accident that left him unconscious for 2 hours. Many historians believe this was a turning point in both his physical health and his temperament. Though he eventually regained consciousness, the trauma likely damaged his leg permanently, and may have triggered or worsened the chronic ulcers you now find yourself battling daily. You work in silence after that initial chaos, your face damp with sweat, your hands shaking. But slowly the bleeding eases. The colour improves, slightly. You pack the wound with a paste of honey, turpentine and lard, muttering a prayer you're not entirely sure is still church approved. You don't care. Eventually the king slumps back, eyes half-lidded. His face is pale now, the fury spent. He's breathing, if only just. You sink onto the floor beside him. You don't even remember when you started shaking. A long silence follows, then he croaks. You're still here. You look at him. I am, sire. You didn't run. No, sire. A long, awful pause, then, good. He closes his eyes. You glance up and realise that the other doctors, the ones who'd been summoned first, are now huddled by the door like scolded schoolboys. They wouldn't touch him, wouldn't risk getting it wrong. You acted. And now you're the one with blood on your sleeves and vomit in your throat, but at least your head's still on your shoulders. You spend the rest of the day in the king's chambers. He's not allowed to move, not that he wants to. His energy's drained. You adjust the bandage every hour, watching for signs of fever or delirium. You mix tonics, bark of willow for pain, powdered antimony for purging, though he refuses to drink it, and poppy syrup to keep him still. That evening Thomas Cromwell arrives. He doesn't knock. He simply appears like a raven in a cloak. His eyes rake across the scene, the bloodied linens, the smeared floor, the king asleep in bed, and you, exhausted, hunched in the corner like a defeated gladiator. You saved him, Cromwell says quietly. For now, you reply. That's all we ever get, but for now. He takes a breath. Expect no reward, expect no praise. I never do. He eyes you. Good. It means you'll live longer. Quirky fact. Despite saving Henry's life on multiple occasions, royal physicians rarely received honours or titles for their work. In fact, many remained relatively obscure, partially because drawing too much attention to the king's frailty was considered dangerous, both politically and personally. After Cromwell leaves, you clean up the worst of the mess. You instruct the servants not to disturb the bandage unless the king begins screaming again, which, statistically speaking, he probably will before dawn. You leave his chamber and walk back to your quarters, where you sit down on the floor and stare at the wall for a full hour. The next morning when you return, he's awake, sweaty, irritable, but awake. You examine the leg and find it slightly less angry. The swelling has gone down. There's no fresh pus. I suppose, he says, voice rasping, you can stay a little longer. I'm honoured, your majesty. You should be. There's scholarly debate about whether the king ever truly understood how close he came to death in moments like these. But you've seen the way he looks at you afterward. It's not gratitude, it's calculation. He knows he needs you, and that knowledge alone infuriates him. You redress the wound one final time and back away. He catches your eye. When I die, he says softly, don't let them say it was my leg. You meet his gaze. No, sire. He grins faintly. Say it was poison, or a bear. As you wish. You leave the room, hand stained, mind buzzing, heart still hammering, and you pray to every star in the sky that you get at least one night of sleep before the next emergency. You know things are truly bleak when you're summoned before you've even had your morning onion broth. You're not even out of your nightshirt when a page pounds at the door and yells through the sewer wood, "The king's breakfast has disagreed with him." That phrase could mean anything, vomiting, rash, hallucinations, or just a bout of royal rage. But none of the options are good for you. You throw on your robe, grab your medical kit, which now rattles from being constantly restocked, and head toward the royal dining chamber with the grim shuffle of a man who expects to be yelled at before the hour turns 6. As soon as you enter, the smell hits you. It's not infection this time. No, this time it's roasted meat, fermented fruit, sour stomach acid, and something charred. You find Henry VIII slouched in his chair, flushed and wheezing, a half-chewed chunk of goose lodged somewhere between his throat and dignity. Around him are 5 untouched plates of meat, a pitcher of cream, a shattered goblet, and one very distressed pastry chef. He looks up at you with watery eyes. I'm dying. You don't even blink. Of course you are, sire. I'm not jesting. I never assume you are. He points dramatically to his stomach. It's revolting. You step closer and place a hand gently on his abdomen. It's distended, hard as overbaked bread. The man is full, not just of food, but fury. He groans. My gut is rebelling against my crown. You mutter something about the rebellion likely beginning with last night's pickled eels and candied boar snout. He doesn't hear you, or he pretends not to. You ask what he's eaten. He lists items like someone confessing sins. Lamb, venison, sugared oranges, fish custard, mutton with mint, and something called pear meat soup, which you pray isn't exactly what it sounds like. The man consumes meals like battles, aggressively and with no survivors. Historical fact, Henry VIII's diet was catastrophic by modern standards. He routinely ate enormous portions of red meat, white bread and sugary confections, and drank wine or ale with nearly every meal. Vegetables were seen as food for peasants. Combined with his declining physical activity, his diet likely contributed to gout, obesity, and various digestive issues, including today's crisis. You pour a draught of bitter tincture, rhubarb root and crushed fennel seeds, and hold it out. Drink this. He squints at it. Is it poison? If it is, it's merciful. He snorts, then downs it. He groans again. It burns. That's how you know it's working. You order a warm compress and gently press it to his abdomen. He growls. Not a metaphorical growl, an actual bestial noise. The pastry chef flinches and ducks behind a curtain. As the warmth settles, Henry slouches further into his chair, sweaty and trembling. My bowels, he whispers dramatically. They conspire. You nod solemnly. Many monarchs suffer at their hands. He groans again. Then something shifts in his face. A moment of recognition, or perhaps just realization. He stares down at his plate, then at you. What if I've been poisoned? Ah, there it is. He squints at you like you might be the one holding the vial. Did someone give you money to put something in my stew? No, sire, you say, as calmly as one can while accused of treason. You wouldn't tell me if they did. I most certainly would, your majesty, you lie. He snorts again. Too many cooks, too many rats. His eyes flutter closed for a second, then open again wide. Check my pulse. You place 2 fingers gently on his wrist. He yanks it away. Too fast, he mutters. It's always too fast. That means death is near. You press the inside of your cheek with your tongue and pretend to scribble notes. You prescribe a warm bath and a quiet room, 2 things he'll never actually follow. But to your surprise, he lets himself be led to his chambers, groaning with every step. His belly is round and tight as a wine barrel, and his robe doesn't close properly anymore. He lies back and orders the windows shut, the fire doused, the servants dismissed, except for you. That's how you end up kneeling beside his massive bed, fanning him with a cloth while he moans dramatically, and occasionally asks if his will is properly apocalyptic. You assure him it is. Quirky fact. The king's paranoia about being poisoned wasn't entirely unfounded. Poisoning was a real fear in royal courts, especially when food and drink passed through so many hands. Entire staffs were devoted to preventing such events, including tasters, trusted kitchen guards, and hand-selected apothecaries. But Henry's suspicion, even of his closest servants and doctors, bordered on obsession. Hours pass. The tincture works, slowly. His stomach gurgles, deflates slightly, and eventually he passes gas so thunderous it startles the chambermaids 3 rooms over. You, of course, do not react. Reaction implies judgment, and judgment gets people executed. He sighs. Relief. Your bowels remain loyal, sire, you say. You saved me. You bow. It was your strength that endured. He nods, satisfied by the lie. Then, send the chef to the stocks anyway. You're not sure if he's joking. You nod anyway. There's debate about whether Henry's digestive complaints were actual illnesses or dramatised bouts of attention-seeking. Some scholars believe his food-related tantrums were part performance, part delusion. Others point to stress and diet-induced inflammation. You, however, suspect something simpler. When a man is too powerful to be told no, he'll always blame the goose when his stomach turns. You stay with him until nightfall, administering small sips of mint water and barley gruel. He sleeps for a time, his face slack, lips parted. You finally stretch your aching legs, ease the cramps in your back, and creep out into the hallway. You've spent the entire day with a royal case of indigestion, and still somehow it's one of your better days. You reach your chamber, sit in the dark and whisper to yourself, "Please let tomorrow be about someone else's insides." But you already know better. You don't even make it to breakfast before someone's bleeding again. That's how your day begins. Another summons, another shuffle through cold corridors, and another aching reminder that Tudor mornings are not for tea and contemplation, they are for bloodletting. The messenger this time is soaked in sweat, face pale, voice barely steady. His Majesty requests immediate humoral correction, he says. You blink at him. Translation: the king wants to be bled. Again. Likely because someone told him Venus is in retrograde, or because he had a bad dream involving a goat and a Spaniard. Doesn't matter. When the king asks to bleed, you sharpen the blade. You arrive to find him sitting upright, legs spread, arm bare and resting on a cushion. His sleeve has already been rolled up by a servant who is now hovering nearby with the same look you've seen on people right before they faint. Henry doesn't look sick, or even angry. He looks eager. That's what worries you. "Good morning, Your Majesty," you say cautiously. "Good morning," he replies, unusually pleasant. "Let's drain the poison." You try not to sigh. Of course. Now, bloodletting isn't the delicate, precise ritual you might imagine. It's messy, loud, sometimes faintly humiliating, especially when the patient is a large, overfed monarch with a history of passing out after 3 ounces. You pull out your fleam knife, a flat, sharp blade with a curved edge designed specifically for this nonsense. You inspect the blade, clean, polished, unfortunately still real. You locate the vein at the crook of the king's elbow, press gently, and brace for impact. The cut is quick, and the blood wells up almost immediately, dark, thick, sluggish. He watches it flow with fascination, like a man watching soup boil. "See that?" he murmurs. "Black bile." You nod, though the colour looks more like clotted wine. "Yes, sire, excellent extraction." Historical fact. In the 16th century, physicians believed the human body contained 4 humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Illness was seen as an imbalance of these fluids. Bloodletting was used to rebalance the humours and treat nearly every imaginable condition, from headaches to fevers to melancholy. You let a measured amount spill into the basin, carefully counting your pulses. Too much and he might faint. Too little and he'll call you a coward. It's always a performance. He likes to feel that you're doing something powerful, something decisive. Never mind the fact that it's more likely to weaken than heal him. He watches the basin fill. "I had a dream," he says suddenly. "Indeed. Wolves in the chapel. A black one led them. They chewed through the altar cloth." You pause, waiting for context. He continues, eyes distant. "I think it was a warning. There's treachery near. Dreams often speak in symbols, sire." "Yes," he says, voice low, and blood speaks in truth. You nod slowly and decide not to point out that his dream might be linked more closely to a mutton-heavy dinner than divine prophecy. The bleeding continues. You massage his hand to keep the blood flowing. A courtier enters, sees the scene, and wisely backs out without a word. You recognise that look. They think this is punishment. But no, this is voluntary. This is how the king proves he still has power over his body, and perhaps over the future. Eventually you stop the flow, clean the wound, and apply a strip of soft linen soaked in rosemary oil. The king looks pale but content, like a man who's had a good cry and wants a nap. "Do I look better?" he asks. "Radiant," you say. He smiles faintly. "Perhaps I'll bleed every week." You pretend to laugh. "I'll start a schedule." Quirky fact. Some nobles actually kept bleeding charts, organised by moon phase, planetary alignment, and personal mood. One baron reportedly scheduled regular bleedings after arguments with his wife, claiming it cleared his spirit. After the session, Henry demands poached pears and a hot bath. You insist on rest and water. He ignores you. You bandage his arm and excuse yourself. Outside, you take a long breath. The hallway smells slightly better than the king's chamber, but that's not saying much. You head back to your quarters, hoping for a short reprieve. You barely sit down when you hear it again, your new least favourite sound, running footsteps, another servant. "Apologies, doctor," he pants. "Lady Mary is asking for you." You blink. "The king's daughter?" "Yes, she's fainted." You pack up your things and sigh. You find Lady Mary in her rooms, surrounded by fussing attendants. She's conscious again, cheeks pale, hair braided tightly down her back. Her eyes lock on yours. "I didn't faint," she says sharply. "I sat down too quickly. They overreacted." You crouch beside her. "Still, let's have a look." She allows you to take her pulse. It's rapid. Her skin is clammy. She's tense, not from illness, you suspect, but from stress. "I suppose Father ordered another bleeding?" she asks dryly. "He did." She sighs. "He bleeds to avoid thought." You don't answer. Mary leans back, eyes closed. "He dreams of wolves now, you know." "I heard." "Do you ever dream of them?" "No." "Lucky you." There's scholarly debate about Mary Tudor's health. Some accounts describe her as frequently ill or fainting, while others suggest she was simply under enormous psychological strain. The truth is likely both. You suspect she's not fainting from illness, but from a lifetime of trying to survive in the orbit of a man whose moods shift like weather. You prescribe rest, valerian root, and tell the attendants to bring fresh air and quiet. Then finally, you return to your quarters. You strip off your blood-smeared robe. You wash your hands with lye and ash. You try not to think about the dream of wolves, or the way the king looked at his own blood like it could tell him secrets. You write in your notes, "Today, His Majesty bled willingly, pulse irregular, humour imbalanced, dream symbolism suggests paranoia, or hunger." You pause, then below it scribble, "No more bloodletting, unless absolutely necessary or ordered, or dreamed, or whispered by a squirrel. Who knows anymore?" Then you lie down, fully clothed, and close your eyes, half expecting a wolf to knock on your door and ask for a tincture. The stench hits you before you even reach the main gate. It's sweet and thick, like overripe fruit and rotting onions, and it clings to the damp London air like a ghost that refuses to be exorcised. You pull your robe tighter as you approach the palace entrance, and though you try to pretend you don't recognise the smell, you do. Everyone does. Even the guards posted at the doors look pale and pinched, eyes watering slightly behind their stoic masks. Plague. Again. You find a folded parchment waiting for you in your chamber, sealed not with wax but twine. A sign it's urgent, maybe even coded. You unroll it quickly. It's from one of your informants in Southwark. Confirmed deaths in Westminster. Boils, fever, black tongues. Burning of linens has begun. You sit down heavily. You were hoping for another week, maybe even a full fortnight, but the plague has a schedule of its own, and right now it seems eager. You pace. If it's inside the city, it's already too late for most people. You've seen it before. A man healthy in the morning can be cold and purple by nightfall. Entire households wiped out in days. Families burned inside their homes to stop the spread. You've read enough ancient texts to know the limits of your craft, but in the face of plague, even the most advanced Tudor medicine boils down to hope, prayers, and a really sturdy door. You're summoned to the king within the hour. Not surprising, he knows. Of course he knows. When you arrive, he's already shouting. "I want the gates sealed," he roars at Cromwell. "No one comes in or out." Cromwell remains still, impassive. "Yes, your majesty." Henry paces, red-faced and sweating. "I want my chambers fumigated. Burn lavender, cedar, musk, whatever keeps the air clean." He turns to you next. "What do we have?" You bow slightly. "I prepared bundles of herbs, wormwood, rue, rosemary, cloth soaks in vinegar to hang by the windows." "Does it work?" You hesitate. "It masks the smell." He narrows his eyes. "Then what does work?" "Prayer," he snarls. "I am the head of the church." "Yes, sire." Historical fact. During the Tudor era, physicians believed that plague was spread by miasma, corrupt or poisoned air. Treatments focused on purifying the environment with sweet-smelling herbs, fumigation, or, in some cases, locking people indoors and praying hard. Actual knowledge of transmission through fleas and rats wouldn't emerge for centuries. You spend the rest of the day directing servants to hang vinegar cloths over doorways, scatter herbs under rugs, and burn camphor by the hearths. You draft a list of people who should not be admitted to the palace, anyone with a cough, a rash, or a recent trip to the markets. The list is long, too long. By nightfall, word reaches you of 3 deaths among the kitchen staff, One maid had collapsed suddenly in the garden, her throat swollen and face blotched with purple marks. The others were discovered in the servant quarters, too late to isolate. You're asked to examine the bodies before they're burned. You bring gloves, linen cloth, and a cloth soaked in vinegar to cover your nose. They are laid out in the stables, away from the palace proper. The air is thick and still. The corpses are already beginning to turn and the skin blackened around the neck and under the arms. Your stomach turns. You force yourself to lean in. Boils, buboes, high fever, sudden death. Confirmed. The Black Death has returned to court. You don't sleep that night. You sit in your chamber grinding dried herbs into powder, portioning out doses of rosewater, sage tincture and charcoal pills. None of it will work. Not really, but it helps people feel like something's being done. Quirky fact, one popular Tudor remedy for plague involved stuffing a dead pigeon into the armpit of the afflicted. It was believed that the pigeon would draw out the infection. Others wore charms, garlic necklaces, or carried pomanders filled with herbs to ward off bad airs. The next morning the palace is different. Quieter, servants whisper, courtiers walk in single file, hugging the walls, avoiding eye contact. The sound of bells from the nearby chapel tolls more often. Once every hour now. The king, of course, refuses to leave. "This is my household," he says. "I will not be driven out like a rat." You don't dare contradict him, but you also know that every hour he spends here increases the risk of infection. You suggest moving him to the Royal Hunting Lodge at Greenwich, where the air is cleaner. He scowls, then spits into the fire. "If I leave, they'll say I ran. If you stay, you may not be able to run at all." He glares at you for a long time. Then he says, "Make preparations. We leave tomorrow." It's a small victory, but you take it. There's scholarly debate as to how frequently Henry VIII actually fled London during plague outbreaks, but records confirm multiple royal progresses to countryside estates during epidemics. Sometimes he left on short notice with a skeleton staff abandoning whole palaces behind him. That night you begin preparing travel supplies, medical kits, bandages, tinctures, gloves, vinegar cloths. You instruct the servants on sanitation. You meet with the stable master to choose the healthiest horses. You even suggest quarantining the kitchen staff before departure, an idea that earns you a very suspicious look from the head cook. You lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if you've already breathed in too much. You think of the maid who died in the garden. You think of the king's ulcer, the pus, the smell that's no longer just his. The plague doesn't care about bloodlines or crowns. Tomorrow you ride, and if you're lucky, you'll outrun it. If not, you'll be treating a monarch in full collapse. The palace evacuates at dawn, in the kind of quiet rush usually reserved for fleeing armies or doomed wedding guests. No trumpets, no ceremony, just a procession of horses, wagons, sweating guards, and one very groggy king being carried out in a litter because he refuses to ride. You walk alongside, clutching your bag of supplies, your eyes scanning every face for signs of fever. The fear in the air is nearly physical. It clings to skin like damp fog. Henry looks worse than usual this morning. His skin has taken on that waxy pallor you know too well. He hasn't eaten. He hasn't screamed. He hasn't even mentioned his leg, which is perhaps the most terrifying part. It's bandaged under layers of cloth, but you've already changed the wrappings twice and seen more grey than red. He won't talk about it. He just stares forward, jaw clenched, like he's daring death to show up and make the first move. The journey to Greenwich is rough. The roads are muddy, the summer heat thick and unrelenting. The royal litter sags under Henry's weight, and every pothole jolts a groan from his throat. You're forced to halt several times to readjust him, change out sweat-soaked linens, and force water down his throat. He glares at you after every sip, like you've personally insulted his lineage. By the time you arrive, the lodge smells like dust and herbs. The staff here has already prepped the rooms, hung vinegar-soaked cloths from every window, and burned cedar in the hearth. It's an improvement, briefly. You get the king inside into bed and finally manage to peel back the leg wrappings. What you find makes your stomach twist. The ulcer has deepened again despite your work. There's a dark ring around the edges now, like ink on wet paper, and the skin feels spongy to the touch. Not good. You clean it in silence, and Henry watches you with bloodshot eyes. "Worse?" he finally asks. You pause. "No improvement, sire." That's the kindest way you can say yes. Historical fact, in the 1530s and 1540s, Henry's health began a sharp decline. His leg ulcers became more severe, his mobility decreased, and he experienced frequent fevers. Despite multiple progressions to countryside estates during plague outbreaks, his condition continued to deteriorate, likely due to a combination of infection, obesity, and chronic inflammation. You apply a poultice made of crushed yarrow, goose fat, and red clay. It won't cure anything, but it may buy you another day. He doesn't flinch during the process. That, more than anything, unnerves you. Afterward, you pour yourself a cup of weak wine and slump into a chair near the window. The countryside outside is deceptively peaceful. Green fields, birdsong, the distant clatter of carts unloading. You'd almost believe life was normal if your hands didn't smell like decay. Later that evening a messenger arrives. A sealed letter, bearing the royal crest and the kind of wax smudges that scream, "Opened by 4 people already." You break the seal. Inside, news from London. The plague is spreading, dozens more dead. Entire households taken. The Bishop of Rochester is sick. A foreign ambassador has fled. Parliament may be suspended. The Tower has reported 3 cases among the guards. You glance up at Henry, who's now half asleep, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. You burn the letter. Quirky fact, during plague outbreaks, news was often suppressed to avoid panic. Letters were frequently intercepted or censored, especially those that might reflect poorly on the court's ability to protect itself. Physicians were among the few allowed to speak freely, though doing so often came with consequences. You spend the night moving between rooms, checking on the kitchen staff, examining servants with even the faintest sniffle. You're running out of rosewater. You've started cutting the tinctures with rainwater collected from the courtyard gutter. Oh, and no one needs to know. At one point you check on Henry again. He's awake now, staring at the ceiling. "I dreamed of the sea," he says quietly. "Endless, grey, no wind." You sit beside the bed. "Was it peaceful?" He shakes his head. "Empty." You nod. "Dreams are often like that, sire." He turns to you slowly. "Am I dying?" You're quiet for a beat too long. "I've seen the signs," he continues. "I've read the scrolls, the swelling, the dreams, the silence in the court. They all think it." You lean forward, your voice low. "Then let them think. Let them worry and scramble and pray. But you, your majesty, are not dead. You're tired. You're infected. You're in pain. But you're not gone. Not yet." He stares at you for a long time, then finally blinks. "You're a poor liar." You smile. "And yet still employed." He closes his eyes again. "Tell me a story." You blink. "Sire?" "A tale from when you were young." You hesitate, then launch into a brief tale about a butcher's son in Cambridge who claimed he'd cured a goat's madness by whispering psalms into its ear. Henry doesn't laugh, but he smiles faintly. It's the first time you've seen anything resembling warmth in 2 days. There's scholarly debate about whether Henry truly feared death or simply hated losing control. You've seen enough now to know the truth lies somewhere in the middle. He doesn't fear dying, he fears decay. The slow unraveling of a man once called the most powerful in Christendom. That, to him, is the real horror. Before you leave the chamber, he murmurs, "If I die out here, make sure the chroniclers don't say it was the plague." "What should I write?" He pauses, then mutters, "Say I drowned a Spaniard in wine and died laughing." "Very well." You return to your quarters, exhausted, trembling slightly. You soak your hands in salt water, light a bit of rosemary, and pray to every god you've ever heard of, even the ones no one worships anymore. You end the day by sharpening your scalpel in silence, because if tomorrow's anything like today, you'll need it. And maybe not just for wounds. You wake up to murmurs, the kind of whispers that travel quickly through the thick stone walls of a royal lodge, slithering under doors and slipping through cracks like smoke. The kind that tell you someone important has done something disastrous. You sit up, bones creaking, hair tangled from too little sleep, and before you even reach for your robe, there's a knock. It's not a page this time. It's Cromwell. He steps into your chamber like a storm cloud. No words at first. Just a glance, one of those cold professional looks he gives when something's gone horribly wrong, but he hasn't decided who's to blame for it yet. "Come with me," he says. "The Queen requests your presence." Now that's new. You follow him in silence, your mind racing. The Queen, Catherine of Aragon, still holding on to the title by her fingernails, is not someone who calls for physicians unless something's gone spectacularly sideways. And if she's asking for you, it means Henry hasn't sent her one of his own physicians, which means you're about to walk directly into a very thorny, very personal political mess. Just another delightful day in Tudor England. Catherine waits for you in a smaller chamber off the main wing of the lodge. It's warm, dimly lit, and smells of lavender and worn parchment. She sits straight-backed on a cushioned chair, flanked by two ladies-in-waiting who look like they're ready to faint. Her face is pale but composed, every inch a queen, even if her crown is metaphorical these days. "I require your discretion," she says, without preamble. "Always, Your Majesty." She gestures toward a young woman seated beside her. "My maid. She's unwell. She fainted this morning and has developed a fever." You step forward and kneel beside the maid. Her skin is clammy, her breath shallow. There's a flush creeping up her neck, and you can feel the unmistakable heat radiating from her body. She murmurs something barely audible. "How long has she been fevered?" you ask. 2 days, Catherine replies. You blink. 2? I didn't wish to alarm the court. Too late. Historical fact. Catherine of Aragon, Henry's first wife, was a devout Catholic and a woman of remarkable discipline and quiet authority. Even when her marriage began to crumble and Henry sought Anne Boleyn, Catherine remained composed and politically savvy. She knew how quickly rumours could shift power in the Tudor court and often chose silence as her shield. You examine the maid's hands. They're trembling. Under her arms, small swellings, hot, tender, unmistakable. Your stomach drops. "She needs to be isolated," you say softly. Catherine's jaw tightens. "The others cannot know, "Your Majesty, this is the plague." "I know," she whispers, "but if the king suspects I harboured it in my quarters—" She doesn't finish the sentence. She doesn't need to. You rise slowly. "I'll handle it. Quietly." She nods once. "Thank you." You arrange for the maid to be moved discreetly to a side building near the stables. You choose 2 servants you trust, mostly because they owe you favours from a previous incident involving wine and a nearly amputated finger. You give them strict orders: gloves, herbs, vinegar cloths, and absolutely no contact with the main lodge. You return to the Queen's chamber afterward. She's sitting alone now, hands folded. "She's a good girl," she says. "Reads psalms aloud to me. I told her she was my little angel." You nod. "I'll do what I can." "You can't cure her," she says. "None of you can." "No, Mum, but you can try." "Yes." Quirky fact. Tudor physicians had no real treatment for plague beyond herbal fumigations, isolation, and bloodletting, which often worsened the patient's condition. Some even resorted to wearing strange beaked masks filled with herbs, more common on the continent, to filter the bad air. You, however, have only your robe, a vinegar rag, and the growing sense that none of this will end well. Back in the main lodge, Henry hasn't noticed your absence. He's been screaming about taxes and sweating through his doublet. His leg has started to stink again. You clean it quickly, distracted, mind still on the maid. "You're pale," he mutters. "I'm always pale, sire." "Are you hiding something?" You freeze. "No, Your Majesty." He grunts and slumps back in his chair, but he watches you with narrowed eyes. There's scholarly debate over how many close calls Henry had with plague. He survived multiple outbreaks, often fleeing cities or quarantining within fortified estates. Some letters hint that several palace staff died without the king ever being informed directly. Others suggest he was well aware but chose to ignore the full truth. Either way, he survived. Others didn't. That evening you check on the maid. She's worse, much worse. The swellings have spread. Her breath rattles like wind through dead leaves. She grips your hand, eyes wide with terror. "I don't want to die," she whispers. You smile gently. "You're safe. Just rest." She dies before dawn. You inform Catherine privately. She doesn't cry. She simply says, "Bury her deep and burn the linens." You nod. And you do. By midday, Henry is demanding poached swan and calling for Anne Boleyn again. The court is shifting beneath your feet. One queen quietly mourning, one mistress plotting, and a king whose leg is turning black. You change his bandage, say nothing, and pretend not to see the new blackness creeping toward the bone. There's a knocking in your mind now, a quiet little voice you try to ignore. It says you should leave. It says you should run, but you know you won't, because the king still breathes, and as long as he does, so do you. You've started hearing the word witch more than usual. It begins as a whisper, slippery, quiet, tossed casually between two ladies in waiting as they pass your chamber door. Then it crops up again at dinner, muttered by a portly lord with half a roast pheasant stuffed into his beard. He's talking about a birth gone wrong, a stillborn child delivered early, twisted and silent. He blames the midwife. Of course he does. You're called to examine the mother, a minor noblewoman travelling with the court, her face still slick with tears, her body trembling beneath silk sheets. The babe is already wrapped in linen and placed in a chest. You're not allowed to touch it. You're barely allowed to speak. The midwife cursed it, the husband says. She muttered strange prayers. She was asking God for mercy, the maid corrects. She was speaking in tongues, he snaps. You stay silent. You've seen this before, a tragic loss, a mother broken with grief, and anyone needs to take the blame. The Queen sends for you shortly after. Not Catherine, not Anne, the Queen of the moment. And this moment belongs to Anne Boleyn. She waits in a chamber filled with rose petals and beeswax, one hand resting over her belly, her hair braided with tiny silver charms. She's early in her pregnancy, barely showing, but already surrounded by whispers and superstition. She eyes you with that familiar mix of suspicion and hope. I want you to examine my humours, she says. You nod. Of course, Your Majesty. I want to ensure I carry a son. You pause for just a second too long. Is that difficult? She asks, the sharpness rising beneath the silk. No, you say quickly. Of course not. You check her pulse. You inspect her urine, collected in a polished glass vial, pale yellow and harmless. You do not tell her that urine analysis is about as accurate as reading goat bones. Instead, you say, the signs are promising. Good, she says, because if I lose this child, they'll say it was witchcraft. They say that already, you mutter before you can stop yourself. She narrows her eyes. You bow quickly. I mean only that people will always whisper, Your Majesty, that's their nature. She watches you, then finally nods. Historical fact. Anne Boleyn was accused, both during her life and after her death, of having used witchcraft to seduce the king and control his will. While these accusations were likely politically motivated nonsense, the belief in magical interference, especially during pregnancies or miscarriages, was deeply rooted in Tudor superstition. Miscarriages were frequently attributed to curses, evil spirits, or demonic interference, rather than natural causes or poor health. After the appointment, you're called to yet another chamber, this one occupied by the midwife accused of cursing the stillborn child. She's old, grey-haired, hunched with arthritis, and terrified. Guards stand at either side of her, though she poses no threat. You're asked to evaluate her for signs of witchcraft. You consider suggesting a full psych evaluation for the guards instead. She said a prayer, the captain tells you. She spat on the threshold. She always does that, the midwife whispers, to ward off spirits. Spirits, the captain echoes grimly, as if the word itself has horns. You kneel beside her. Her hands shake. Her wrists are bruised from the way she's been held. She's a healer, you say softly, not a witch.
She cures the womb.
No one can curse a womb, trust me, I've tried. He doesn't laugh, not even a smirk. Tough crowd. Quirky fact. In Tudor England, midwives often walked a razor-thin line between reverence and suspicion. They were respected for their experience, especially among lower classes, but also feared for their knowledge of herbs, poultices, and the inner workings of women's bodies. If a birth went wrong, they were frequently accused of sorcery, especially if they were old, poor, or outspoken. You eventually convinced the captain to let her go, with a warning, of course, and the condition that she no longer whispers strange words or draws marks with chalk. The poor woman nods, dazed, and is led away, barely able to walk. Later you find yourself alone in your quarters, washing your hands in lavender water, scrubbing so hard your knuckles redden. You don't know if it's to remove the scent of smoke and fear, or if you're just trying to wash away the part of yourself that's starting to accept this madness as normal. The next day the rumours grow worse. Another miscarriage, this time in a different household. Another midwife taken for questioning. A courtier claims she saw a rat walking backward. A sign of dark magic, apparently. Someone else says the king's leg is turning black not from infection, but from a curse laid by a Spanish nun. You'd laugh if it weren't being said seriously. Anne calls you again, and she's panicked now. They say I gave Henry the ulcer. You blink. That's not how ulcers work. They say I walk with demons, that I keep charms beneath my pillows, that I named my dog after the Pope. You pause. Did you? She waves that away. What do I do? You think carefully. Then you say, give birth to a healthy son. She stares at you. I know, you say, but that's the only thing that will silence them. There's scholarly debate about whether Anne Boleyn truly believed she was being targeted by dark forces, or whether the idea of witchcraft was simply a convenient weapon her enemies used against her. Most agree she was savvy, sharp, and deeply aware of court politics, but fear, especially fear tied to childbirth, makes people believe in all sorts of things. You end the day writing two things in your notes. First, the Queen is afraid. She's right to be. Second, I am afraid. I do not know what of. You extinguish the candle and listen to the scratching in the wall behind your bed. Probably rats. Probably. But just in case, you burn a pinch of sage in a saucer and whisper the Lord's Prayer in Latin, like the old midwife taught you. Just in case, you don't even knock anymore. You're waved into Anne Boleyn's chambers with the kind of urgency normally reserved for fire or treason. When you arrive, the Queen is pacing, barefoot, hair loose, one hand clutching the swell of her belly, the other shaking with fury. She's bleeding again, a lady-in-waiting whispers to you, as if blood were a ghost that might hear its name and come roaring back. Anne whirls toward you, eyes blazing. Fix it! You hesitate. Fix what exactly? Her jaw tightens. The pain, the bleeding, whatever is happening, I want it stopped. Now. You move to her gently, hands raised like you're approaching a wounded animal. Let me examine you, Your Majesty. She sits reluctantly on the edge of the bed. The sheets beneath her are spotted with rust-coloured patches. Her nightgown clings to her with sweat. Her face is drawn, cheeks flushed from panic, but it's the quiet desperation in her eyes that nearly undoes you. You check her pulse, weak, fluttering. Her abdomen is tender. The bleeding isn't heavy, yet, but it's too early in the pregnancy for this much to be normal. You apply a warm cloth soaked in rosewater and myrrh to her belly, an old trick meant to calm the womb, though you doubt its effectiveness. Is it the plague? She whispers. No. Poison? No. Then what? She snaps. You look at her and in your most delicate tone say stress, exhaustion, fear. She glares at you like you've slapped her. You think I'm making this worse? I think your body is trying to protect you. And if it fails? You don't answer. Historical fact. Anne Boleyn miscarried at least one known pregnancy in 1536, reportedly around the same time Henry began to lose interest in her and question her usefulness as queen. Contemporary sources describe a shapeless mass, or even a male fetus, lost at around 15 weeks. The loss of a son was politically devastating and contributed heavily to her eventual downfall. You instruct the ladies in waiting to keep her lying flat, feet elevated, lights low. You prepare a tonic, valerian root, lavender, and a touch of powdered pearl. She drinks it slowly, choking slightly on the bitterness. She'll rest now, you tell them. You start to leave, but Anne grabs your wrist. He can't know. You turn. The king? She nods. If he hears I'm bleeding, he'll think I've lost the child already. And then... She doesn't finish. She doesn't need to. I'll tell him you've taken ill from the heat, you say. Her eyes lock on yours. You owe me your position, remember that. You nod. I remember everything. You leave the chamber with a stomach full of ice. By the time you reach the king's quarters, he's already summoned you. Of course he has. Somehow he always knows when things go sideways. Whether it's spies or intuition, you've never been sure. He's reclining, leg elevated, bandages freshly changed. His colour's better today, less grey, more pink, but the swelling's returned. The skin is tight, glossy. You'll need to lance it again soon. He squints at you. How is Anne? You bow. Weaker today, the heat, I suspect. He leans forward. No bleeding? You hesitate, then lie. No, Your Majesty. And he nods slowly. Good. She must carry it. We need this son. You bow again. There's a pause. Then he says, If she fails, we'll blame the witches. You say nothing. Quirky fact, Anne Boleyn's enemies wasted no time crafting stories of her witchcraft, including claims that she had a sixth finger, a mole shaped like a devil's face, and that her stillbirths were punishment for using sorcery to entrap the king. Most of these stories emerged after her execution, but even during her life, court gossip whispered about her strange moods and unnatural confidence. Later that night, you check on Anne again. She's awake, pale, silent. You sit beside her, quietly preparing a fresh cloth. "I haven't lost it," she whispers. "Good. But it's close." You nod. "Still not lost." She closes her eyes. "I used to think I could control him," she says. "With wit, with beauty, with truth." You wait. "I didn't understand then. It's not control he wants. It's devotion." She turns to look at you. "Do you love him?" she asks suddenly. You blink. "He is my king." She smiles faintly. "That's not what I asked." You don't answer. There's scholarly debate about Anne's emotional state in her final years. Some letters paint her as confident and calculating, while others suggest she was increasingly paranoid, desperate, and aware that her time was running out. You think it's entirely possible to be both. People in power rarely get to choose just one emotion. The bleeding lessens slightly over the next 2 days, but Anne remains fragile, confined to her bed and silent for long stretches. Henry does not visit. He asks about her condition once a day and grunts at your answers. You bleed his leg again. The infection is crawling upward now. You clean it with wine, burn the edges with hot iron, and pray he doesn't feel it too much. He screams. Then he throws a goblet at a servant. Then he weeps. Afterward, he tells you a dream. She stood in the water, he says, Anne, her gown red with blood, holding a crown in her hands, and she said, "You do not deserve this." You wait for him to go on. "She dropped it," he says, "and it sank." You say nothing. Do you think it's a sign? You think it's guilt, but you say, "It might be." He stares at the fire. "Then I need a new dream." You nod. "I'll work on that." That night you return to your chamber, collapse onto your cot, and dream not of queens or ulcers or stillborn sons. You dream of silence, of cool air, of a room where no one's bleeding or dying or begging you to lie. But you wake to knocking, again, always the knocking. The king has a headache today, which sounds harmless enough, just a twinge behind the eyes, a dull throb at the temples, but when your patient is Henry VIII, a headache isn't a passing complaint, it's a declaration of war. It's the court walking on eggshells, servants whispering behind tapestries, and you being dragged from your quarters at dawn, half-dressed and still dreaming of simpler times when your biggest problem was Leeches misbehaving in the medicine chest. You're brought into his chamber to find him sitting in near darkness, curtains drawn, candles snuffed. Only the hearth glows softly. The air is thick with rosemary smoke and anxiety. He's clutching his forehead like it's trying to escape. "Make it stop," he growls without looking at you. You bow. "Of course, Your Majesty." The headache is not new. It's become more frequent these past months, lurking behind his eyes like a ghost that won't leave. You've tried every known remedy. Lavender oil rubbed on the temples, compresses of cool wine, dried nettle smoked in a pipe, even prayer when things get desperate. Nothing works for long. You step forward, speaking in a soft tone, careful not to startle him. "Has there been any vision distortion today, sire?" He grunts. "Everything hurts, even your voice." You bow your head. "Understood." You check his pulse, fast. His skin is flushed, moist with sweat. You check his pupils, uneven, not wildly so, but enough to give you pause. His eyes dart away. "I saw my father last night," he mutters. You blink. "In a dream?" "No," at the foot of the bed, staring at me. You freeze. "What did he say?" "Nothing." He closes his eyes. He just looked disappointed. Historical fact. Henry VIII suffered from frequent, possibly debilitating headaches later in life, especially following his 1536 jousting accident. Some modern historians and physicians speculate traumatic brain injury, possibly a subdural hematoma or concussion, which could have contributed to his sudden mood swings, impaired judgment, and chronic pain. You wet a cloth in rosewater and press it gently to his forehead. He winces, then sighs. The scent calms him slightly. You hand him a tonic, crushed poppy seeds in honeyed water, and he downs it without complaint. Then he opens his eyes and says, "Tell me it's not madness." You meet his gaze. It's a common affliction, caused by heat, tension, poor air. But not madness. No, sire, 'cause if I lose my mind, I lose my crown. You nod slowly, and you are in full possession of both. He doesn't believe you, but he lets the lie stand. Later, as you write your notes in the corner by candlelight, a courtier enters quietly, places a folded parchment on your desk, and leaves without a word. You unroll it. It's from Anne. "Come at once." You sigh, pack your things again, and make your way to her chamber. She's sitting in a chair by the window this time, hair down, pale, but not as hollow-eyed as before. She motions for you to close the door behind you. "I need to speak with you," she says. You sit. "I hear the king speaks of ghosts." You nod once. "He mentioned his father." "And his brother." "Not yet." She leans forward. "Do you believe he's losing his mind?" You consider your answer carefully. "I believe he's in pain, and pain wears down even kings." She exhales. "If he loses his wits, they'll remove him. They won't dare. They'll say it's God's punishment, that the blood on his leg is the stain of sin, and once they whisper it enough, the people will believe." You nod, and you fear what that means for you. She looks down. "For me, and the child." There's an awkward silence, then she asks, "Can the mind be healed, like a wound?" You wish the answer were yes, and that in your world madness isn't understood. There are no maps, no herbs, no guaranteed prayers, only the slow, creeping dread of knowing something vital is slipping away, and you can't stop it. "I don't know," you say honestly, Joey. She doesn't respond, just stares out the window. Quirky fact. The Tudor understanding of mental illness was limited at best. Conditions like hysteria, melancholia and lunacy were often attributed to imbalanced humours or supernatural forces. Madness could be treated with anything from bloodletting to forced exorcism, or in the case of women, confinement and silence. As for kings, they weren't allowed to go mad, at least not publicly. Back in your chamber you start to see signs yourself. The king forgets names, simple ones. He repeats stories already told minutes before. He speaks to people who aren't there. Sometimes he laughs, softly, at nothing at all. And the leg, God, the leg is worse. You try not to flinch as you unwrap it each morning. The skin is splitting now, purple at the edges. The smell has grown aggressive, crawling up your nostrils and living behind your eyes. It's rot, yes, but not just flesh. You think it's something deeper, something inside him unravelling from the core. You suggest a poultice of ground white willow bark and mint. He agrees, absent-mindedly. Then he mutters, "They say I killed a saint." You pause. "Who says that?" He doesn't answer. You write it down anyway. There's debate, even now, about the cause of Henry's mental decline. Some blame untreated syphilis. Others point to repeated concussions, particularly from the 1536 accident that rendered him unconscious for hours. A few even suggest an autoimmune disease or chronic kidney failure. But you're beginning to believe it's all of it. His body is failing, his mind is simply following. That night you hear music coming from the hall, lutes, low singing. Someone is pretending this is still a court full of life and laughter. You open your chamber door to see Anne dancing, alone, slowly in a circle. While a musician plays near the fire, she's barefoot. Her shadow flickers on the wall like a ghost dancing with its own death. You close the door, you sleep eventually, only to wake up gasping with your hands clenched, convinced for a moment that the king was standing in your room, staring at you with black eyes and a crown of thorns. Just a dream, you hope. The bed groans under him now. Every time he shifts you hear it. The creak of strain in timber, the snap of fabric thread holding on for dear life. The king is growing heavier, thickening like bread left too long in the oven. His doublets barely close, even with new panels sewn in. His legs swell with fluid, his face is puffed and ruddy, and still, somehow, he insists he is fitter than ever. You examine him in the mornings now with all the reverence of a priest handling a sacred relic that smells like it's gone off. "Still handsome?" he asks you today, one eye half-lidded as you kneel beside the bed and unwrap his bandages. You do not laugh, you never laugh. Radiant, you say, voice steady. As ever. He smirks. Anne says I snore like a lion. You murmur, a regal beast, sire. You peel back the cloth. The ulcer has not improved. In fact, it's growing again, slowly burrowing its way through layers of muscle and into something you're afraid to name. It oozes, it weeps, and when you gently probe around the edge, it leaks with a hiss, like a fruit too ripe, cracked open under pressure. The smell is unholy. You feel your throat tighten. Henry flinches. Careful. Apologies, you whisper. Just assessing progress. You can't bring yourself to say the word worsening, not when his knuckles are white on the bed frame and a new vein is bulging at his temple. He's been demanding larger meals, 4 roasted birds per day minimum, whole pies filled with quail and thick cream, sweets stuffed with sugar and lard and berries so overcooked they've become jam with a title. His appetite has no bottom now, and the kitchens have become frantic assembly lines, churning out whatever might distract him from pain. Historical fact, Henry VIII's weight ballooned in his final years, with some reports estimating he reached over 300 pounds. Combined with limited mobility due to his leg injuries, this led to worsening circulation, gout, and an ever-expanding waistline that required his clothes to be custom-fitted by teams of tailors. His girth made simple tasks, like walking or even sitting, miserable. Anne has stopped attending meals. She claims it's for her health, that she's resting for the child, but everyone knows it's because she can't stand to watch him eat anymore. His feasts are grotesque now, more like performances of power than nourishment. He sweats as he eats, demanding that musicians play louder, that the meat be redder, the wine colder. You were summoned to one such dinner recently, purely because he claimed he felt a twinge in his shoulder and wanted you to stand nearby while he consumed a whole leg of venison. You watched him rip meat with his teeth and then belch so loudly the tapestries shuddered. Afterward, he turned to you and said, "I could wrestle a bear." You smiled. Undoubtedly. Quirky fact. One of Henry's favourite dishes in his later years was a sweetmeat known as marchpane, a dense confection made from almonds and sugar. Entire castles and battle scenes were sculpted from it, presented to him as edible centerpieces. He often consumed them in one sitting. The Tudors did not believe in portion control. The real problem, of course, isn't the food, it's the movement or lack thereof. Henry barely walks now. He orders servants to carry him, and they do, red-faced and trembling beneath the weight of a king and his ever-expanding throne. The special wheeled chair you helped design sits unused most days, because he claims it makes him look crippled. But everyone sees the truth anyway. Even worse, he's begun refusing to bathe regularly. He says it weakens him. Baths are for boys, he claims. Sweat proves a man's strength. You've tried to explain that the stench surrounding him doesn't inspire fear, it inspires nausea, but he won't hear it. Instead, he slathers himself in musk and rose oil and claims it wards off plague. It does not. You've started documenting everything, not just the medical details, but the changes in mood, in body, in presence. Notes, July 10th. Weight increased again, swelling in both legs, difficulty breathing after short walks, new pain near right kidney. Possible stone, refuses to acknowledge it. Mood increasingly volatile, demanded a roasted swan at 3 am, threw a candle at his reflection in the mirror. Later asked me if God weeps. You're not sure if these notes will help anyone. Maybe a future physician will read them and laugh, or weep, or both. But you have to write it down, otherwise you'll convince yourself it's all normal. Because when the king says he's in excellent health, everyone agrees, including you. One night you're called to his bedchamber again. He's sweating through the sheets. He thinks he's dying. You check his pulse. It's strong. His temperature's only mildly elevated. It's not the end, not tonight. But he looks at you, pale and frightened, and says, "My body is turning against me." You don't deny it. You can't. "It's rebellion," he whispers, "inside my own skin." You nod slowly, but you're still winning. He grins, delirious. For now. You place a cloth over his forehead, change the dressing on the leg again, and listen to him breathe. Later you find yourself in the kitchens, begging the cook to prepare something with less meat and sugar. She laughs in your face. "You want me to tell the king he's had enough pie?" You say nothing. She stops laughing. Fine, she says, but if he cuts off my hand, I'll ask them to stuff it in your mouth before I die. You don't sleep that night. You just sit by the window, watching the moon pass through the trees, wondering how many more meals the king has in him. Wondering what happens when a man grows too large to carry, physically, politically, spiritually. Wondering how long you can keep pretending this is medicine. Thomas Cromwell summons you before dawn, which is never a good sign. Cromwell does not rise early for idle chatter or to admire the mist over the river. If he's calling you at this hour, something has gone very wrong, or is about to. You hurry through the courtyard, the grass slick with dew and your boots silent against the stones. You've learned to walk softly in this court, especially when powerful men are losing patience and kings are growing too large to move. You find Cromwell in a small study tucked behind the royal chapel, a fire already roaring despite the summer heat. He doesn't offer you a seat, he doesn't offer you tea, he just gestures to a letter on the table and says, "You need to see this." You pick it up, it's not sealed. Already opened, already read, already judged. The wax is cracked like old bone. It's a report, foreign, from a merchant recently returned from France, speaking of new remedies, being tested at the University of Paris. Tinctures, syrups, a holy salve meant to draw poison from the blood. None of it is proven, of course, but Cromwell's eyes glitter like it is gospel. "We need something new," he says. "The king grows worse." You nod. He grows heavier. He grows dangerous. He walks to the window, hands clasped behind his back, posture too stiff to be casual. "We've sent the Queen away for her rest," he says. "And Anne, well, let's just say her situation is becoming delicate." You don't ask what he means, you already know. "She cannot bear another loss," he says flatly. "Neither can the king's pride." You nod again. "I'll prepare the mixture." "You'll do more than that," he says, turning back toward you. "You'll fix him." The word hangs in the air like a guillotine. You want to laugh. You want to ask him if he truly believes you can fix a man whose own leg is trying to crawl away from his body. Instead, you say, "I'll try." That afternoon you bring the new concoction to the king. You've mashed it yourself, honey, garlic, ground poppy and just a touch of amber. It smells like regret and tastes worse. You present it in a silver goblet with your best neutral expression. He eyes it suspiciously. "What's in this?" You lie. "Mint and lavender." He downs it anyway. Then he belches so forcefully you feel it in your chest. Historical fact. Cromwell played a significant role in the day-to-day administration of the king's household, including oversight of royal physicians and apothecaries. While not a doctor himself, he often acted as an enforcer, pushing for results when the king's health was in decline. Physicians under his watch frequently feared political fallout more than medical failure. Later, while checking the king's leg, you find Cromwell standing just behind you, silent as ever, arms folded, watching. You've grown used to this now, being observed, measured, silently threatened. You speak calmly, detailing the condition. New swelling, black tissue along the shin. The muscle no longer reacts to pressure. He hasn't felt anything below the knee in 3 days. "Then what happens next?" Cromwell asks quietly. You glance at the king, snoring now, wine heavy and drooling. If the infection reaches the bone, he may lose the leg. Can he survive that? You hesitate. If it's done quickly, if he doesn't bleed out, and if it's not, you look him straight in the eye. He dies. Cromwell nods once, not in shock, not even in concern, just a small mechanical acknowledgement. A clerk checking a box. Quirky fact, Tudor medicine had almost no understanding of sterilisation or internal infection. Amputation was performed without anaesthetic and often resulted in death from blood loss or sepsis. Surgeons, who were not considered real doctors, were called in only when absolutely necessary, and even then, reluctantly. Amputating a royal limb was as close to political suicide as one could get with a knife. That night you meet with the king privately. He's lucid for once, tired, yes, and gassy, but lucid. He speaks slowly, as if measuring each word against the weight of his own breath. "I'm being watched," he says. You nod. "Cromwell follows me like a crow." "He's loyal," you lie. He chuckles. "He's loyal to survival." He shifts, wincing. You see his face tighten. He's afraid again. He doesn't show it often, but when he does, it's raw and almost childlike. "You'd tell me if it was time, wouldn't you?" You pause. I would. And if they tried to kill me, I'd stop them. He smiles, teeth stained with wine. Good man. He falls asleep before you leave. In your notes that night, you write, condition worsening, loss of sensation, odour spreading, sepsis likely, mental clarity fluctuates, appetite absurd, mood defiant, pain immense, delusion manageable. Then you add, Cromwell knows, the king suspects. I am between two swords. You take a walk in the moonlight just around the gardens. The flowers are blooming. The frogs chirp. The world somehow still turns. And all the while, inside those thick stone walls, a king is rotting from the inside out while his court plots praise and poisons behind tapestries. You wonder how many physicians history will remember. You wonder how many end up buried with the kings they fail. You return to your quarters, sit by the dying fire and sharpen your knives. Not because you plan to use them, not yet, but because Cromwell may soon ask you to. And when that day comes, you'll need a blade sharp enough to cut through history. You wake up to silence, not the calm, comforting kind. The thick, anticipatory scent of ulcer that settles over a place when everyone knows something is wrong but no one wants to say it. The halls are too quiet, the servants too stiff, the courtiers too polite. There's no laughter, no lute music, not even the sound of someone being loudly blamed for a missing goose pie. Just hush, waited and waiting. It takes you less than an hour to hear the whispers that the king didn't rise, that the king didn't eat, that he didn't shout at anyone. And if King Henry isn't shouting, something is definitely wrong. You rush to his chambers. The guards outside look like they've swallowed hot stones. When they let you in, you already smell it. That sickly mix of sweat, stale meat and something sharper. Infection. Angrier than usual, deeper. You find him still in bed, face the colour of parchment, mouth slightly open. His eyes are glassy, not unconscious, but hovering at the edge. He's breathing fast, too fast. His chest rises and falls like he's sprinting, even though he hasn't moved an inch. You cross the room in 3 strides and place your hand on his forehead. Burning. His sheets are soaked through. His doublet has been peeled halfway off, clinging to his sides like wet cloth. You lift the covers and gently examine the leg. The ulcer is weeping blood now, not just pus. Blood. It's purple at the edges, blistered in places, and the smell hits you like a slap. Rot. Sour and raw, like the inside of a corpse. You feel the heat radiating off it and try not to flinch. The rot is spreading fast. You look up at his face and he knows. He doesn't say anything, but you see it in his eyes. The recognition, the realization, maybe even the fear. I'm here, you say. He closes his eyes and nods, barely. Historical fact. Toward the end of his life, Henry VIII's ulcerated leg became dangerously infected. Descriptions from the time reference, heavy bleeding, foul discharge, and moments of semi-consciousness brought on by fever. Many modern scholars believe he developed sepsis, possibly several times, which would explain the mental fog, the tremors, and his sharp mood swings. You bark orders at the servants. Boiled water, clean linens, wine. You summon your assistant, your poor exhausted assistant, and begin packing herbs into paltookis so fast your hands blur. You crush poppy seed for pain. You dab vinegar onto linen and press it to the wound. You don't even think anymore. You just do. For a few moments, Henry dozes. Then he wakes with a start, eyes wide, chest heaving. "They're poisoning me," he hisses. You freeze. "Who?" He grabs your sleeve, surprisingly strong. "You?" You blink. "Sire, no." "You're all traitors." You try to speak. He won't let you. "Witches, all of you. With your herbs and your wine and your needles. You've cursed me." "No, your majesty," you say gently. "You're ill." "I'm King of England," he bellows. Then he convulses, jaw clenched, and lets out a moan that seems to shake the bedposts. You administer a heavy dose of poppy syrup. He resists at first. You press it to his lips. Eventually, he swallows. You let him drift off, trembling, soaked in his own sweat. And then you sit back, and you wait. Quirky fact. It was common in the Tudor period to accuse physicians of poisoning their royal patients when treatments failed, especially if those treatments were foreign, experimental, or just particularly foul-tasting. Several royal physicians were arrested, exiled, or quietly disappeared. when monarchs worsened under their care. Being a doctor to a king was, historically, a job with an impressively short retirement plan. Hours pass. You redress the wound again and again. The bleeding won't stop. He vomits twice, violently, until there's nothing left but bile and trembling. You try to give him broth. He refuses. He mutters things you can't understand, names, places, sometimes scripture, sometimes gibberish. A servant brings news. Cromwell is on his way. Of course he is. You prepare a report. You write down every symptom, every dose, every hour. You don't embellish. But you don't tell the whole truth either. You leave out the screaming. You leave out the moment when the king called out for his mother, voice cracking like a child's. You don't think Cromwell needs to know that. When he arrives, he doesn't speak. Just reads. Then he asks, "Will he live?" You meet his gaze. "Not if this continues." Cromwell nods. "You'll keep trying." "I always do." "Try harder." He leaves. You turn back to your patient. That night Henry wakes again, thrashing into the bed, eyes wide. "They want me gone," he says. "They want to end me." "No one wants that," you lie. He grips your arm. "Then why am I still dying?" You don't answer. Because what do you say to a man whose body is decomposing beneath him while his brain insists he's immortal? You do what you can. You try one last treatment, an old physician's trick, something you haven't dared use before. You mix ground gold leaf into wine and drip it between his lips. "Drink, your majesty." Then he gags, then swallows. You wait. Nothing happens. Of course nothing happens. There's scholarly debate over whether anyone truly tried gold-based treatments on Henry VIII, though it was popular among alchemists and physicians who believed in noble metals as purifying agents. Some recipes even called for powdered pearls, believing they could restore vitality. You'd try dragon bones at this point, if you thought it would help. Eventually he sleeps again. The room is quiet but heavy. You sit beside him with your back against the wall, candle flickering near your foot. You're too tired to write notes tonight. Too tired to think. Too tired to pray. You stare at the ceiling and imagine the infection crawling up through his veins like ivy climbing stone. You wonder how much longer you can keep dressing a wound that wants so badly to consume its host. You wonder if your name is already being whispered in rooms you'll never be allowed to enter. Because when the king accuses you of poison, it doesn't matter what's true. It only matters who lives to tell the story. There's a new list being passed around the court. No one will admit it exists, but everyone's heard about it. A secret list. Names whispered in back rooms, etched into minds but never onto paper. A list of people who've failed the king, people who've disappointed, disobeyed, or simply been in the wrong place when Henry's mood soured like curdled milk. You don't need to be told whose name is last on that list. You can feel it pressing down on you every time someone avoids your eyes in the corridor. You can see it in the way servants pause before letting you into chambers. You hear it in Cromwell's silence. The worst part, you don't know how close to the top you are. It starts with an empty chair at the council table. A man who was there yesterday, now gone. No explanation, no goodbyes, just vanished. The next day, another. A clerk with too much information and not enough friends. Then a groom who accidentally dropped a tray outside the king's door and never came back to the stables. And then the rumours start. They say the king dreams of flames again. He thinks his leg bleeds because of curses. He said the doctor put a demon in his poultice. You hear it all, every sideways glance and the nervous laugh. The walls are soaked in fear now. You can almost taste it. You try to ignore it. You tell yourself your job is medicine, not survival. But even you don't believe that anymore. Henry is worse. There's no polite way to put it. The fever has settled into his bones, and his thoughts are roiling like a storm. One minute he's lucid, barking orders and demanding roast duck. The next he's muttering about wolves in the gardens and dead queens tapping on the windows. He speaks to his leg like it's a separate entity. Sometimes he threatens it. Yesterday he slapped a servant for offering a linen too cold. Today he accused the palace cat of spying. You don't argue. You just nod, agree, apply the salve, write the notes. Hope he doesn't notice that you are running out of options. Historical fact. Henry VIII's court was infamous for its paranoia and political purges. The fall of Thomas More, Anne Boleyn, and later Cromwell himself were all swift and merciless. Servants, scribes and physicians alike lived in constant fear of being linked to the wrong rumour or the wrong outcome. Being close to the king was both a privilege and a death sentence waiting to be signed. That afternoon, you're summoned unexpectedly, not to the king's chamber, but to Cromwell's private study. You've only been there once before. It still smells like ink and iron. He doesn't speak right away. He just pours wine into 2 cups, hands you one, and stares. "I assume you know about the list," he says. You don't answer. "You're not at the top," he continues, "but you're on it." Your mouth is dry despite the wine. He thinks you're slipping, Cromwell says, that you're hiding things, that you've grown fond. You say nothing. Any answer is the wrong one. He asked me yesterday if you've been talking to Anne. You meet his gaze. I'm the only physician left who can manage his leg. True, Cromwell says, but only until someone else learns how. There's a pause. Then, are you loyal? You nod. To him, he adds. You hesitate. I've served him faithfully. Cromwell studies your face. You didn't answer. You leave the room with shaking hands and wine sloshing in your stomach. Quirky fact. Physicians during the Tudor era were expected not only to treat illness, but to act as loyal courtiers, confidants, and sometimes spies. Many doctors fell out of favour simply for being too close to their royal patients, or not close enough. Treason charges were often vague, and the definition of betrayal changed daily. You consider packing your things that night. There's a river nearby. You could be gone by morning, disappear into France, change your name, open a quiet apothecary where no one asks about royal legs or bleeding moons. But then you get the next message. He's asking for you. You return to Henry's chamber with your heart banging like a drum in your chest. He's alone, half-sitting, swaddled in too many layers, sweat pooling in the folds of his doublet. He looks at you like he's been waiting years. "You're still here," he mutters. "I am." "Good, everyone else runs."
"I'm not everyone."
He chuckles. It sounds like gravel. "You remind me of my fool. He died. Or left, I don't remember." You kneel beside the bed and check the dressing. The wound is no better. The edge is necrotic now. You wipe away dark fluid, sniff gently. Yes, still infected. "I've been thinking," he says, "about ghosts." You glance up. "Sire, I saw Anne last night. Not the living one, the dead one. Said she'd see me soon." You say nothing. She was wearing a crown made of thorns. Lovely, really. He watches your face, waiting for fear. Instead, you say, "Sometimes the mind offers us symbols. I think they're warnings." "Then you're lucky," you say. "Most men don't get warnings." He laughs again. "You're clever. I should have made you bishop." You smile faintly. Then he grabs your wrist. His grip is weak but urgent. "If I go," he whispers, "they'll blame you." You nod. "I know. But if I live," he says, "you'll be untouchable." You nod again. "Then keep me alive." You don't say I'm trying. You just unwrap the next cloth and press the salve deeper, ignoring the hiss of infection, the sour sting, and the look in his eyes that says he doesn't believe it anymore. That night, you sleep with your knife under your pillow, not to use, just to feel something solid. You've assisted in childbirth before, awkwardly, with trembling hands and the distinct sense that everyone else in the room knew what they were doing except you. But this time, it's not a noble woman from some minor house or a stable maid with no title. This time it's Jane Seymour, the Queen, the new Queen. You're called just after midnight. The air outside is thick with mist and cold enough to bite your skin as you move from your chamber to the Queen's birthing room. You weren't meant to be here for this. This should have been managed by midwives, watched over by trusted ladies. But something's wrong, badly wrong, and suddenly your name is on everyone's lips again. This time not for an ulcer or a phantom curse, but because the Queen's labour has gone from long to dangerous. You enter the chamber to chaos. The air is humid, heavy with the smell of sweat, rosewater and fear. Jane is groaning on the birthing bed, head back, hair plastered to her face. Her shift is soaked through. 2 midwives are arguing near the window, one whispering prayers, the other muttering curses under her breath about the baby being stuck. A noble woman is crying in the corner, clutching a rosary. You move fast, no hesitation. If you're going to be blamed for this, at least you'll know what you did or didn't do. "She's been in labour for 2 days, one midwife tells you as you kneel beside the bed. The child won't turn. You examine her carefully, gently. Jane barely registers your presence. Her eyes flutter, lips cracked. Her breathing's shallow, fast, wrong. She's burning up, you say. Has she passed anything? Blood, a little water? And the child? They shake their heads. You look at the Queen. Your Majesty, you say softly. We're going to try something now. She nods, almost imperceptibly. Historical fact, Jane Seymour's labour lasted more than 2 days. She gave birth to the long-awaited male heir, Edward VI, but the delivery left her physically broken. Within 12 days of the birth, she was dead, likely from puerperal fever, a common and often fatal postnatal infection in a time when hand-washing was not yet standard practice in medicine. You take over. You bark orders. You request hot cloths, wine, even a smudge stick to clear the air. Not because you believe in it, but because everyone else does. You need them calm. Jane needs them calm. Then, very carefully, with the midwife supporting her sides, you guide her into a new position, side-lying, supported by bolsters, giving the child just a little more space to move. You pray, you lie, and say it'll be fine. And then you hear it. A cry, not the Queen's. The baby. You exhale so hard your knees nearly give out. They take the child, red, squalling, and full of life, and announce loudly enough to shake the rafters, a boy. You've never heard a room change so fast. The sobs turn to cheers. The ladies in waiting begin weeping with joy. The midwives kiss their rosaries. One of them faints. Someone starts singing a hymn. Outside bells begin to ring. It's 3 a.m. You turn back to Jane. She's pale. Her lips have gone blue at the edges. She smiles faintly. A son, she whispers. He'll be safe now. You nod. He will. Then her head lolls sideways and her breath catches. She's still bleeding, someone says. You press cloth to the source, soaked within seconds. You try again and again. You order powdered alum. You call for ice. You send someone sprinting for vinegar, but the bleeding doesn't stop. She's torn, a midwife murmurs. Inside. You don't say anything. You know what this means. Quirky fact. Puerperal fever, also known as childbed fever, was a common postpartum infection in the pre-antiseptic era, often caused by dirty hands or contaminated tools. It could set in hours after delivery and kill within days. Its symptoms were often misunderstood, and the treatments range from ineffective to fatal. By morning, Jane is still alive, but barely. Her breath comes in shallow wheezes. Her eyes flutter open and closed, and she no longer responds to her name. The child, Prince Edward, has been taken to the nursery, attended by wet nurses and guarded like a holy relic. But no one celebrates. Not yet. Not while the Queen lies there, dying. You are summoned by the King just past sunrise. He's beaming. You did it, he says, pacing before the fire. She did it. A prince. My heir. You bow. Yes, your Majesty. He'll be strong, just like me. You don't mention that the child is barely the length of his forearm and currently screaming in terror at every passing shadow. Henry claps you on the shoulder. You've done well. You'll be remembered for this. You want to say, then remember the Queen too, but you don't. Because hours later, she slips into fever. By the next day, she's delirious. She calls out for her mother, then for Henry, then for God. She claws at her bedding and sobs in languages no one taught her. You do everything you can. Lavender oil, leeching, cooling cloths, prayers. Nothing works. She dies on the 12th day. The Queen is dead. The King is silent. You're summoned again. This time he doesn't smile. She gave me a son, he says, and now she's gone. You nod. We tried everything. She would have been a great queen, he mutters. Not like the others. She was obedient. You don't respond. He sits down heavily, and for a moment, just a moment, he looks like a man broken open. All the rage, the bluster, the wine and war and ulcered flesh, none of it shields him from this. Then he says, make sure they remember her. And just like that, he stands and leaves. There's scholarly debate over whether Henry truly mourned Jane Seymour, or whether her death was simply another chapter in a long, brutal saga of wives and heirs. But those who were there said he wore black for months and never remarried in her lifetime's memory. You believe it. You saw his face. You return to your quarters. You sit. You stare at your hands. blood still under your nails. You pour yourself a goblet of wine, drain it in one gulp, and whisper to no one in particular. I did what I could, but the chamber stays silent, as if it disagrees. The mourning is mostly symbolic. Black fabrics draped across entryways, hushed footsteps through the corridors, extra masses sung in a chapel that smells faintly of rot and lilies. Jane Seymour has only just cooled in her coffin, but already the machinery of court has resumed, clanking and wheezing like an old beast that's forgotten how to stop. The bells toll for her, yes. The servants weep, yes. But the kitchens are still cooking, and the guards are still gossiping, and you're still called to the king's bedside before dawn, like nothing at all has changed. But it has. It absolutely has. You find Henry awake, not weeping, never that, but quiet in a way that feels unnatural. He's sitting up, leg elevated on 3 cushions, staring at nothing. His beard is fuller than it's ever been, and his eyes are red-rimmed. He's dressed in mourning black, but the fabric pulls awkwardly over his girth, stretched tight across his belly like a tablecloth over a wine cask. "She's gone," he says when you approach. "I know, sire." He doesn't ask you to make her better, doesn't curse you for not saving her, doesn't scream or throw anything. That somehow makes it worse. "Bury her with care," he says, "not like Anne." You don't mention that Anne's burial involved a reused arrow chest and a few inches of quicklime. "I want a proper tomb," he adds, "for her and for me." You hesitate. "For you?" "When the time comes," he mutters, almost to himself, she was the only one who gave me a son, and she'll have me beside her, no matter what." Historical fact, Jane Seymour was the only one of Henry's wives to receive a queen's funeral. She was buried at St. George's Chapel, Windsor, and Henry later joined her there upon his death, just as he had ordered. Despite his many marriages, it was Jane who bore him his longed-for heir, and she remained his true queen in death. You nod. You pretend to write it down. He closes his eyes. "The pain's worse today." You unwrap the leg. The bandages come away with a slurp and a shudder, revealing a wound that is no longer just a wound, it's a battlefield. The centre is raw, angry, a crater of rot ringed in shades of black and sickly yellow. You suppress a gag. You've seen gangrene before, but this is personal. You clean it, slowly, carefully. You pour vinegar over it and grit your teeth as he howls. Then you place a new poultice, one you mixed yourself from charcoal and pomegranate rind and just the tiniest pinch of silver shavings. You're trying everything now, even the things you swore you wouldn't. He's sweating profusely. The heat in his body is climbing again, the fever pulsing just beneath the surface. "I'm being punished," he mutters, "not to you." "For what?" you ask softly. He doesn't answer. Later you hear from Cromwell, and he tells you the king has asked to be left alone for the next few days, that no women are to be permitted in his chambers, and that he'll speak only to trusted men. You're on the list. Barely. Just below the chaplain and the cook. "He's unraveling," Cromwell says, pacing near the hearth. He stares at nothing for hours, talks to shadows, refuses meat, refuses wine. That last part makes you sit up. He also says he hears her, Cromwell adds, Jane, at night. She's dead. I know he doesn't. There's scholarly debate about Henry's mental health following Jane's death. Some say he was genuinely broken by the loss. Others argue that it was convenient grief, measured and politically useful. You've stood next to him in those quiet moments. You know which version is true. You're asked to stay close over the next week, not in the chamber, but nearby, in case he takes a turn, in case he stops breathing, in case someone needs a body removed discreetly before the court wakes up. You make yourself a small camp in the hallway outside. A cot, a candle, a flask, a scalpel cleaned and ready. And you wait. One night, while you're half asleep, he calls for you. You stagger into his chamber. He's sitting up again, hair wild, eyes hollow. The fever has returned. His hands are trembling. I dreamed of the boy, he says. Edward, but he was grown, thin, pale, dying. It was a dream, you say gently. It was true, he snaps. He was alone, no air, no strength. You stay silent. He wipes sweat from his brow. If he dies, it's your fault. You swallow. He's healthy, sire. He's weak, he growls. He needs a stronger mother. You feel your heart drop. Are you saying, I need a new queen? he says simply. Quirky fact. Just days after Jane Seymour's funeral, discussions began regarding Henry's next marriage. Though he officially mourned her for a time, diplomatic efforts to find another politically advantageous match moved quickly. Marriage was not simply a matter of companionship, it was empire building. Women were wombs with treaties attached. You should rest, you say. I need sons. You have one. I need more. He grabs your sleeve. If I die and he dies, what happens? You don't answer. You know, he whispers. You know what they'll do. They'll tear the kingdom in two, the Scots, the French, the Spaniards. They'll laugh. Your son will survive, you say. He won't. He stares at you. Unless I find someone stronger. You see it then, how grief and ambition twist together like threads in a rope. How power turns even sorrow into strategy. The next day you hear he's asked Cromwell to begin making inquiries. German princesses, Flemish duchesses, any woman with a sturdy name and sturdier hips. You return to your notes. The king mourns, but only in moments. Fever continues, rot spreading, appetite diminishing, wounds unchanged, mental state fractured, delirium increasing, plans for remarriage underway. You put your pen down. You look at your hands, still stained from dressing the leg of a man who already dreams of replacing the dead woman who gave him everything he ever wanted. And you wonder, if the king dies tomorrow, will they mourn him the same way, or just find someone else to put on the throne? It starts with a portrait, a flat, lifeless thing painted by a man you've never met, delivered rolled in velvet and carefully unfurled before the king like a sacred relic. The woman in the painting is tall, pale, and suspiciously free of blemish, her nose a little long, her chin a bit proud, but her skin is smooth, her eyes intelligent, and her waist enviably narrow. The king stares at the canvas for hours, silent, calculating. You've seen him more animated about a roasted pig, but then again, Henry's interest in women always begins this way. Quiet appraisal, followed by appetite disguised as diplomacy. The woman is Anne of Cleves, German, Protestant. Entirely unaware that her face on this canvas is being weighed against the ghosts of wives past, and the aching, ulcerated needs of a man unravelling from the inside out. She's not beautiful, Henry mutters. You try to sound neutral. She's certainly regal. He snorts. So was Anne Boleyn, until she opened her mouth. The court is already whispering. Jane's body is barely cold in her tomb, yet here they are again, measuring fertility like coin, debating bloodlines, scrutinising hips. There's even talk of a fertility test, as if you could somehow wring royal sons out of a woman like juice from an orange. You stay quiet during the negotiations. You're not needed for this part. You're summoned only when Henry begins complaining about his leg again, now stiffer, hotter, and prone to unexpected bleeding. The infection is locked in now. It pulses with his heartbeat, slow and deliberate. Every time you change the dressing, he flinches and curses. Every time you touch the wound, you wonder how many days are left before it simply refuses to clot. Historical fact. Henry's marriage to Anne of Cleves was arranged largely through political necessity, orchestrated by Thomas Cromwell to secure a Protestant alliance. The marriage, based in large part on Hans Holbein's portrait, famously ended in disaster when Henry found Anne unattractive in person. Their union was never consummated, and the marriage was annulled after just 6 months. When Anne finally arrives, the king insists on surprising her. A romantic gesture, he claims. He disguises himself and enters her chamber, expecting a swoon. She recoils instead, startled, confused, barely polite. She didn't recognise me, he complains to you later. She's in a new country surrounded by strangers, you offer gently. She called me old, he growls. She didn't mean... She laughed. You've heard the story a dozen times by nightfall. Henry pacing, red-faced and furious, ranting about insult and deception, and how he was promised a beauty and given a housemaid. He orders the marriage to go forward in Nipple way. Diplomacy demands it, but you know in your gut it's already doomed. The wedding is grim. He smiles for the public, holds her hand for the paintings, but privately you hear him mutter about annulments before the ink is even dry. She has no breasts, he whispers once, loudly, during a feast. Like a boy. She's intelligent, you say. She smells like turnips. You stop trying. Quirky fact. In one of the most awkward personal accounts ever recorded, Henry reportedly claimed he could not consummate the marriage with Anne of Cleves because of her unattractiveness and his own lack of arousal. He famously told courtiers that he had examined her naked and found her body unsuitable. Anne wisely never argued. Meanwhile, the leg worsens. It's a mess now, skin sloughing off at the edges, the blackened area hardened like old leather. You try maggot therapy, yes, maggots, live ones, drop gently into the wound to eat away the dead tissue. It works for a while, but he screams when they wriggle too much. You stop after 3 treatments, he won't allow it again. Instead, you're back to charcoal paste and lye soaks. He drinks more wine now, more poppy syrup, sometimes both. One day he insists he's feeling better and declares he'll ride again. It takes 6 men to get him onto the saddle. His horse limps from the effort. The next day he doesn't rise from bed at all. He complains that Anne is cold. She won't touch me. You consider saying you terrify her, but instead you offer, perhaps she's nervous. She should be honoured. He breathes heavily. She's lucky, he says. You nod, slowly. She's not Jane, he mutters. Jane would have warmed me. Jane would have tried. You don't mention that Jane would be dead by now anyway. There's scholarly debate over whether Henry's failure to consummate the marriage was a result of his disgust with Anne, or his own increasingly obvious impotence. Chronic infection, obesity and depression are known to dampen libido, especially when the body's been at war with itself for over a decade. But of course, the king would never admit such a thing. Eventually the annulment is drafted. Anne is given a generous settlement and a new title, the king's sister. She accepts it with grace, no resistance, no tears. You think she may be the smartest of all his wives, and then comes the next name, Catherine Howard, young, very young, too young, barely out of girlhood, with a smile like a dagger and eyes that know exactly what they want, or at least what they think they do. Henry lights up when she's near, like a dying flame given fresh kindling. He laughs again, strokes his beard, glares at any man who dares look at her too long. She makes me feel alive, he says. You try not to respond. She's soft, not like Anne, not like Catherine before her. Not like Jane, you ask without thinking. His eyes go cold. Don't speak her name. You nod once, carefully. Then he leans forward. This one will last. You hear that, and something inside you wilts. Not because you disagree, but because you know exactly how that sentence ends. Catherine Howard enters the court like a scented breeze, young, bright, and utterly unaware of the room she's walking into. Or maybe she is aware, and just doesn't care. You can't tell which is worse. She's all fluttering sleeves and coy glances, the kind of girl who twirls too fast and leaves old men breathless. And one of those old men just happens to be King Henry VIII, who now watches her with the vacant hunger of someone remembering what desire used to feel like. She is delightful, the king says, reclining in his cushioned chair, leg oozing beneath him, eyes distant and glassy with lust, or something trying very hard to imitate it. You're not sure what surprises you more, that he can still entertain the idea of pleasure, or that someone so young doesn't see the grave she's stepping into. You bow. She's certainly well spoken. She called me her lion, he adds, grinning like he's forgotten how many teeth he's lost. You don't respond. The marriage moves quickly, almost absurdly so. Parliament gives a polite nod, courtiers cheer with the enthusiasm of men who know how to fake joy, and the palace buzzes with silks and lace and wedding songs. You're summoned to confirm Henry is well enough to wed again. You say he is, because your job isn't to tell the truth anymore. It's to not say the wrong thing. By now, Catherine is 17. Maybe. No one's quite sure. She walks through the halls like she owns them, giggling with ladies in waiting, occasionally stopping to touch flowers or mirrors or passing dogs as though every object she sees is lucky to exist in her presence. She is everything Jane wasn't. Lively, loud, warm-blooded. And the king is bewitched. Historical fact. Catherine Howard, Henry's 5th wife, was indeed a teenager when she married the king, who was nearly 50, severely overweight, and chronically ill. Their marriage in 1540 was marked by her youth and energy, both of which drew him in and ultimately became her undoing. Her prior romantic entanglements and flirtations would later be used as evidence in her downfall. He asks for her constantly, calls her Rose Without Thorns. The ulcer in his leg remains, but he tolerates the pain better now. He says her presence soothes him. You suspect it's just the wine and opiates talking, but fine. If she keeps him quiet, you'll take it. You try not to think about what she must endure each night, what it's like to lie beside a man who smells of infection and vinegar, who groans with pain when he shifts, and who expects you to call him your king while ignoring the evidence of his decay inches from your face. You know she must gag sometimes. You know she's pretending. But in the light, she plays the game perfectly. She sings, she dances, she drapes herself over him during feasts, feeding him fruit and letting him stroke her arm like a prized falcon. He tells you he's never felt younger. He's never looked older. Quirky fact, Henry took to publicly displaying Catherine, parading her before the court like a jewel on loan. He dressed her in opulent gowns, covered her in pearls, and delighted in presenting her as a symbol of his virility, despite his declining health and growing impotence. Catherine was known to flirt openly and loved attention, which in time would prove disastrous. It doesn't take long for the whispers to start. A guard who lingers too long by her door, a former music tutor, handsome and broad-shouldered, seen walking too close, letters exchanged, laughter behind closed curtains. You try not to believe them. You really do, but you've seen this story before, and you know exactly how it ends. One day, as you change the dressing on the king's leg, he says, "She brings me life." You murmur, "That's a gift, sire." She's not like the others. You look down at the leg, now seeping more than before, and say nothing. "She'll give me another son." You pause. "Your Majesty, if I may." You start, then stop yourself. Go on. "I recommend against more attempts. The fever, the wound, it's taxing, dangerous." He stares at you. "Do you think me weak?" "No," you say carefully, "but I think your body requires rest." He slams his goblet onto the table beside the bed. Wine splashes. You flinch. "You think I'm a corpse. You think I'm done." "I think you're surviving something that would kill any other man," you say, trying to sound impressed instead of exhausted. He glares, then he exhales. "Cromwell thought like you," he mutters. You blink. "Sire, he doubted me, undermined me, brought me a wife I couldn't stomach, thought I'd roll over and become some figurehead." You realise this isn't just conversation, it's a warning. There's scholarly debate about what truly sealed Thomas Cromwell's fate. Was it the failed marriage to Anne of Cleves, his growing influence? Or was it simply that he stopped flattering the king's illusions? Whatever the reason, within weeks of Catherine Howard's arrival, Cromwell was arrested, charged with treason, and executed, just like that. A week later, you find Cromwell's name scratched out of the official registers, his coat of arms burned from the tapestries, his family stripped of wealth, his enemies now promoted. The king never mentions him again. You double your efforts. You smile more. You compliment Catherine's voice when she walks past your chair, humming. You praise the king's skin, his strength, his healing energy. You do what's required. And still, one morning a courtier delivers a message. His Majesty wants you to examine the Queen. You freeze. For what? He didn't say. You arrive in her chamber to find Catherine sitting stiffly, alone. No ladies, no music. Her face is pale. You bow. She looks up at you with wide eyes. "Will he kill me?" she asks. You blink. I don't know what you mean." "I think he knows," she says. You don't ask what, you already do. You leave without answering. That night you dream of the king calling for you in a voice full of smoke, of Catherine weeping behind a veil, of yourself standing between them, scalpel in one hand, prayer in the other, wondering which you'll need first. It happens quickly, so fast that even you, who has spent years pacing the border between sickness and scandal, can't believe how efficiently it all falls apart. One morning Catherine Howard is the king's jewel, his little rose, his laughing child queen, who dances in satin slippers and kisses his cheek while chamber musicians play. By the next, her name is being whispered in corridors like a curse, scribbled in letters, erased from on the prayers. She is no longer queen, she is evidence. The charges arrive like thunder. Adultery, treason, moral corruption. Names are dragged from her past like skeletons exhumed too early. Francis Derham, the premarital lover. Thomas Culpeper, the too handsome courtier. You're not told who confesses what, but you see the faces of the men when they're marched out in shackles, and you don't need to hear the words. You already know. Henry doesn't call for you at first. He disappears into his chambers, howling like an injured wolf. No meals, no music, just silence punctuated by fits of rage loud enough to rattle the windows. When he does summon you, it's not to treat his leg, which is worse, by the way, far worse, but it's to sit beside him as he asks, in a voice hoarse from screaming, "Did she ever love me?" You should say yes, you really should. Instead, you say, "I don't think she knew how." He doesn't reply, just stares at the hearth for a long, long time. Historical fact: Catherine Howard was arrested in 1541, less than 2 years into her marriage to Henry VIII. Evidence of her past relationships, as well as suspected affairs during her queenship, were used against her. She was executed in 1542, reportedly after asking for the executioner's block so she could practice laying her head on it the night before. By the time her execution is announced, you've stopped attending court gatherings. You've grown used to the way queens vanish. You know what happens next. The silence, the banners taken down, the seals burned. But this one is different. You catch her eyes once, through a window as she's led toward the tower. They're wide, hollow. She's not crying, just breathing very slowly, like someone trying to memorize air. You don't attend the execution. You claim to be ill. No one questions it, but you hear the bells. You always hear the bells. Later that day, the king says nothing about her. Not a word. He has roast goose for dinner. He eats it alone. You're summoned afterward to change the dressing on his leg, which now seeps constantly and leaves a trail of thick fluid on the floor if he dares walk more than a few feet. You find him seated in silence, wine-stained lips, eyes red. You work in silence until he finally speaks. "She betrayed me." You nod non-committally. They always do. You don't point out that 2 of them died faithful. "They deserve what they got," he says. You look up from his bandages. "Did they?" He doesn't answer. You don't push it. Quirky fact, after Catherine's death, the king's mood was reportedly volatile. Deeply depressed one day, explosively furious the next. Some reports claim he developed a superstitious fear of his wives, worrying that their ghosts might haunt him or curse future marriages. Though he went on to marry again, the court would never regain the same festive glow it once had. You begin sleeping in your chambers with the windows open now, even in the cold. The air inside the palace is too thick, too sour. You need to feel something that isn't sweat, wine, or fear. Each night you lie awake wondering how many more wives will die, how many more physicians will vanish, how long you can stay useful before your usefulness is replaced. And still every morning the ulcer waits. It has grown beyond description now. It pulses like a living thing. Sometimes it bleeds, sometimes it weeps, sometimes you think you hear it whisper. You begin to believe it might outlive the man who carries it. The leg is necrotic in places. You suspect the infection has entered the bone. He can't feel his foot anymore. His breathing is heavier. His face is often flushed, the kind of colour you see right before the end, but he refuses to slow down. He still insists on being carried to meetings, to councils, even to church. He sweats through every sermon. "I'm strong," he says to anyone who looks worried. He isn't. He can barely walk. You suggest another amputation. You offer names of skilled surgeons. He roars with laughter. "I'll die with 2 legs," he says. "You might die because of them." He just grins. "Then I'll die a complete man." You write that in your journal. January 1542. King refuses further intervention. Fever intermittent. Infection stable but spreading. Mental clarity uneven. Appetite excessive. Mood unpredictable. Blame distributed in cycles. Wives, traitors, weather. Later that night a servant brings you a message. The king wants you to evaluate a list of potential wives. You stare at the paper. You recognise most of the names. Duchesses, noblewomen, some barely older than Catherine. You feel your throat close. You take your time responding. When you finally return to him, he's lying back, half asleep. "Well," he grumbles. You choose a name at random. "She's healthy," you say. "Fertile." He grins. "Then let's begin again." There's scholarly debate about whether Henry truly believed he would find lasting happiness in another marriage after Catherine's execution, or if it was simply habit, Paffer dressed in lace. What's certain is that even as his body deteriorated, he remained obsessed with producing more heirs, more sons, more proof that he was not in fact dying. But you see it every day. You see it in the cracks behind his eyes. You see it in the way he startles when someone drops a spoon. You see it in the moments he clutches his chest, eyes wide, then laughs it off like a joke. He is dying, and he knows, but like everything else in his life, he will not let it happen quietly. That night you wash your hands 3 times, the blood doesn't come off completely. You wipe it on your notes, you pour a glass of wine, and you stare at the ceiling. You wonder who will be next. You wonder how long until the rot finally wins. You wonder, with a small and bitter smile, if anyone will write your name on the wall when it does.